Imagine standing before a mirror that doesn't reflect your physical appearance, but rather the architecture of your thoughts. What would you see staring back? Would you recognize the contours of independent reasoning, or would you glimpse something more unsettling? The subtle erosion of your capacity to think clearly about the world around you? This isn't a question about intelligence in the traditional sense. Brilliance and stupidity, as Dietrich Bonhoeffer discovered in the darkest chapters of human history, are not opposites on a simple spectrum. They are complex forces that can coexist within the same mind, the same community, the same civilization. What if I told you that stupidity isn't just the absence of intelligence, but something far more insidious? A force that can transform brilliant minds into instruments of destruction. Consider the peculiar nature of our current moment. We live in an age of unprecedented access to information, yet misinformation spreads like wildfire across our interconnected world. We have computational power that would have seemed magical to previous generations, yet we find ourselves making decisions based on algorithms designed to exploit our most primitive psychological impulses. We celebrate expertise while simultaneously witnessing the rise of confident ignorance as a cultural force. This paradox would not have surprised Bonhoeffer. Writing from his prison cell in Nazi Germany, waiting for his execution for participating in a plot to assassinate Hitler, he observed something that cuts to the heart of human nature itself. The greatest threat to civilization, he argued, wasn't evil people doing evil things, but ordinary people who had simply stopped thinking. The anatomy of intellectual surrender. Picture this scenario unfolding in countless variations across history and geography. A renowned scientist with multiple advanced degrees suddenly starts believing and spreading dangerous misinformation about vaccines or climate change. A compassionate teacher begins endorsing harmful ideologies that contradict everything they once taught about human dignity. A loving parent starts making decisions that endanger their own children based on conspiracy theories they've absorbed from social media. These aren't evil people in any conventional sense. They're intelligent, well-meaning individuals who possess technical knowledge, professional credentials, and genuine care for others. Yet they've fallen victim to what Bonhoeffer called the power of stupidity, a phenomenon that transforms thinking individuals into what he described as sociological rather than psychological beings. What makes this transformation truly terrifying is its universality. It's not happening to other people, to those we can easily dismiss as less educated or less sophisticated than ourselves. It's happening to people just like you and me, people who consider themselves rational, evidence-based thinkers, who pride themselves on their ability to see through manipulation and propaganda. The mechanism of this transformation reveals itself in moments of historical crisis with startling clarity. In Stanley Milgram's infamous obedience experiments at Yale University, ordinary volunteers were instructed by an authority figure to administer what they believed were increasingly painful electric shocks to another person. Despite hearing screams of agony from the next room, despite their own moral reservations and visible distress, 65% of participants delivered shocks they believed could be lethal. These weren't sadists or individuals with psychological disorders. They were normal people, teachers, engineers, postal workers, salespeople, who had temporarily surrendered their capacity for independent moral judgment to an authority figure in a laboratory coat. The experiment revealed something profound about human nature that extends far beyond the confines of a psychology laboratory. This is exactly what Bonhoeffer witnessed firsthand as Nazi ideology spread through German society, like a contagion of the mind. But his insight went deeper than simple observations about obedience to authority. He recognized that stupidity, in its most dangerous form, isn't a deficit of intelligence, but an active process of intellectual surrender that can afflict anyone, regardless of their educational background or natural abilities. Dietrich Bonhoeffer wasn't your typical philosopher sitting in an ivory tower pondering abstract ideas about human nature. He was a German Lutheran pastor, theologian, and anti-Nazi conspirator who watched his entire society transform before his eyes. Born in 1906 into an intellectual family, his father was a prominent psychiatrist and neurologist. Bonhoeffer had every reason to believe in the power of education, rational discourse, and moral reasoning to guide human behavior. But as the Nazi Party rose to power throughout the 1930s, Bonhoeffer witnessed something that fundamentally challenged his faith in human rationality. He watched as his fellow Germans, educated and cultured people, many of them deeply religious, began supporting policies and leaders that contradicted everything they claimed to believe about human dignity, compassion, and justice. These weren't ignorant masses being manipulated by clever propaganda, though propaganda certainly played a role. These were professors at prestigious universities, doctors who had taken oaths to do no harm, clergy members who preached about love and mercy, and intellectuals who prided themselves on their sophisticated understanding of philosophy, literature, and the arts. Yet they were actively participating in their own intellectual surrender, becoming what Bonhoeffer would later describe as puppets whose strings are pulled by whatever force happens to be strongest at the moment. From his prison cell in 1943, as he awaited execution for his role in the conspiracy against Hitler, Bonhoeffer wrote what would become one of the most haunting observations about human nature ever conceived. Against stupidity we are defenseless. Neither protest nor the use of force accomplish anything here. Reasons fall on deaf ears. What made this observation so chilling wasn't just its context, written by a man who would soon be executed for his principles, but its precision. Bonhoeffer had identified something that distinguished stupidity from evil in a fundamental way. Evil, he noted, always carries within itself the germ of its own subversion. It creates unease, internal conflict, moral tension that eventually leads to resistance and breakdown. Malicious people often know they're doing wrong, which creates psychological pressure that can lead to confession, repentance, or at least the recognition that their actions require justification. But stupidity operates by entirely different psychological mechanics. It believes it's doing good, making it absolutely immune to correction. The person caught in functional stupidity doesn't experience the internal conflict that might lead to self-examination. Instead, they experience the comfortable certainty of being right, of being on the side of truth and justice, even as they participate in systems that destroy the very values they claim to uphold. The mechanics of mental captivity. Perhaps Bonhoeffer's most prescient insight was about how stupidity serves existing power structures. Those in positions of authority don't need to actively suppress information or use crude forms of propaganda to maintain control. They simply need to create conditions where processing information honestly becomes prohibitively difficult, where intellectual shortcuts become survival strategies, and where the cost of independent thinking exceeds its perceived benefits. When Bonhoeffer used the word stupidity, he wasn't talking about low IQ scores or lack of formal education. He was describing something far more complex and insidious, what we might call functional stupidity or willful ignorance. In his letters from prison, he explained the psychological dynamics he had observed. The fact that the stupid person is often stubborn must not blind us to the fact that he is not independent. In conversation with him, one virtually feels that one is dealing not at all with him as a person, but with slogans, catchwords, and the like that have taken possession of him. This description captures something essential about the nature of intellectual surrender. The individual hasn't lost their intelligence in any measurable sense. They can still solve complex problems in their professional lives, navigate complicated social situations, and demonstrate sophisticated reasoning abilities in domains that don't challenge their adopted worldview. But in areas where their beliefs have been captured by what Bonhoeffer called slogans and catchwords, they cease to function as independent thinking beings. Here's what made Bonhoeffer's theory so revolutionary for its time and so relevant for ours. He argued that stupidity often emerges not from individual failings, but from systemic pressures that make thinking independently both difficult and costly. The individual hasn't chosen to become stupid in any conscious sense. Instead, they've adapted to an environment where intellectual surrender provides psychological comfort, social acceptance, and economic security. Our current economic and social systems actively incentivize these intellectual shortcuts. Social media platforms generate billions in revenue when users react emotionally rather than think critically about the content they encounter. News outlets discover that outrage and controversy drive more engagement than nuanced analysis of complex issues. Politicians win elections with simple slogans and emotional appeals rather than detailed policy proposals that require careful consideration. When people are working multiple jobs to make ends meet, drowning in debt, and constantly bombarded with information designed to capture their attention rather than inform their judgment, intellectual surrender becomes what economists call a rational response to impossible circumstances. It becomes more efficient for individuals to rely on trusted authorities, familiar ideologies, and emotional certainties than to invest the time and energy required for genuine understanding of complex issues. But this individual rationality creates collective irrationality, exactly the dynamic Bonhoeffer observed in Nazi Germany. The result isn't just individual choice operating in a neutral marketplace of ideas. It's structural pressure toward intellectual surrender created by systems that profit from our mental passivity and emotional reactivity. The neuroscience of surrender. While economic and social systems push us toward intellectual shortcuts, our brains are actually wired to comply with these pressures. Leon Festinger's groundbreaking research on cognitive dissonance in the 1950s showed exactly how this works at the psychological level. When people encounter information that contradicts their existing beliefs, their brains don't simply update their understanding based on new evidence. Instead, they fight to reject the contradictory information, often by questioning its source, finding alternative explanations, or simply ignoring it entirely. But here's what Bonhoeffer understood intuitively that modern psychology has confirmed through decades of research. This process of cognitive dissonance is dramatically amplified when people are stressed, overwhelmed, or economically insecure. exactly the conditions that our current systems create for millions of people. Modern neuroscience reveals something even more unsettling about the mechanics of intellectual surrender. Our brains are literally wired to fall into functional stupidity under certain conditions. The same neural pathways that helped our ancestors make quick survival decisions in dangerous situations can be hijacked by modern information systems that exploit our cognitive vulnerabilities with surgical precision. Think about the evolutionary context in which human cognition developed. For hundreds of thousands of years, our ancestors lived in small groups where information came from trusted sources: family members, tribal elders, personal observation of the natural world, the ability to quickly accept information from authority figures, and conform to group consensus wasn't a bug in human psychology. It was a feature that promoted survival and social cohesion. But these same cognitive shortcuts become dangerous when applied to complex modern problems that require careful analysis of evidence from multiple sources, consideration of long-term consequences, and the ability to hold contradictory information in mind while working towards synthesis. Bonhoeffer observed that stupidity often emerges most powerfully in group settings. It becomes clear, he wrote, that stupidity is not a psychological problem, but a sociological one. He noticed that perfectly rational individuals would abandon their critical thinking abilities when they became part of a larger group or movement, even when the group's beliefs contradicted their previous convictions and values. This insight was decades ahead of its time. Solomon Asch's conformity experiments in the 1950s demonstrated exactly what Bonhoeffer had witnessed in German society. When surrounded by a group giving obviously wrong answers to simple questions, 75% of people will go along with the crowd at least once, even when they can clearly see that the group is wrong. The implications become even more disturbing when we consider how these psychological dynamics play out in our digital age. Social media algorithms create echo chambers that make intellectual transformation easier and more complete than ever before in human history. False information spreads 6 times faster than accurate information on social platforms, not because people are naturally drawn to lies, but because false information often feels more emotionally satisfying than complex truths. When someone shares misinformation that confirms their worldview, they're not just passing along bad information. They're participating in a system that rewards intellectual shortcuts over careful analysis, emotional reaction over thoughtful consideration, and tribal loyalty over independent judgment. The algorithm feeds them more of the same content, creating what researchers call filter bubbles that act like intellectual quicksand. The more you struggle against them, the deeper you sink. Historical patterns of collective delusion. The pattern Bonhoeffer identified in Nazi Germany wasn't unique to that particular time and place. Throughout history, we see the same dynamic playing out repeatedly. Intelligent, educated people abandoning critical thinking in favor of group consensus and emotional certainty. The Salem witch trials weren't conducted by evil people seeking to destroy innocent lives. They were carried out by God-fearing community members who genuinely believed they were protecting their neighbors from supernatural threats. The judges, ministers, and townspeople who participated in the trials were often well-educated for their time, respected members of their communities who prided themselves on their moral reasoning and religious devotion. Similarly, the Red Scare of the 1950s wasn't driven primarily by malicious actors seeking to destroy American democracy. It was fueled by patriotic Americans who sincerely believed they were defending democratic values against communist infiltration. Senators, journalists, and ordinary citizens who participated in blacklists and loyalty oaths weren't motivated by hatred, but by fear. and the desire to protect what they valued most. In each case, we see the same psychological mechanism at work. When people feel threatened and uncertain, they become more susceptible to authoritative-sounding explanations that reduce complexity to simple narratives of good versus evil, us versus them, safety versus danger. The COVID-19 pandemic provided a real-time case study in how these dynamics operate in the modern world. Doctors, engineers, and lawyers, people with demonstrated analytical abilities and professional expertise, began sharing debunked theories about vaccines, treatments, and public health measures. These weren't failures of intelligence in any conventional sense. They were failures of intellectual independence under unprecedented pressure. The pandemic created exactly the conditions that make people vulnerable to functional stupidity. High stress, conflicting information from authority figures, social isolation, economic uncertainty, and constant exposure to emotionally charged content designed to capture attention rather than inform judgment. The digital amplification of ancient vulnerabilities. Bonhoeffer witnessed Nazi propaganda spreading through newspapers, radio broadcasts, and public rallies, but we're living through something exponentially more dangerous and sophisticated. We've gone from centralized propaganda systems to decentralized algorithmic manipulation that knows exactly which psychological buttons to push for each individual user. Modern artificial intelligence systems analyze every click, pause, emotional reaction, and engagement pattern to build detailed psychological profiles that can predict and influence behavior with unprecedented precision. These systems don't need to convince people to believe false information through logical argument. They simply need to show each person the particular mix of content that will trigger their existing biases, fears, and desires. The threat isn't just escalating in scale, it's targeting the very architecture of human cognition itself. We're entering an age of AI-generated content that can fabricate reality with such sophistication that even experts have difficulty distinguishing authentic information from synthetic manipulation. Our minds evolved to prioritize speed over accuracy, to trust familiar sources over unfamiliar ones, and to seek information that confirms what we already believe. These were survival features that helped our ancestors make quick decisions when hesitation could mean death. But in an information environment designed to exploit these very same cognitive shortcuts, our evolutionary inheritance becomes our greatest vulnerability. The scariest part of this dynamic is its universality. We're all vulnerable, no matter how smart we think we are, how much education we've received, or how sophisticated our analytical abilities might be. The mechanism is exactly what Bonhoeffer described. When people feel threatened and uncertain, they become more susceptible to explanations that reduce complexity to emotionally satisfying simplicities. But here's the crucial insight that makes Bonhoeffer's warning more urgent than ever. We're not just dealing with human manipulation anymore. We're facing systems designed by artificial intelligence to exploit our cognitive vulnerabilities with surgical precision. Every digital interaction is being analyzed and weaponized against our capacity for independent thought. The comfort of intellectual surrender. The tragedy of functional stupidity is that it often feels like liberation rather than captivity. Thinking is genuinely hard work. It's uncomfortable to hold complex, contradictory ideas in your mind simultaneously. It's painful to admit you might be wrong about something important to your identity or worldview. It's exhausting to constantly evaluate evidence, consider alternative perspectives, and maintain intellectual humility in the face of uncertainty. Intellectual surrender offers relief from these burdens. It provides the comfort of certainty, the warmth of belonging to a group that shares your beliefs, and the simplicity of having clear answers to complicated questions. When the world feels chaotic and threatening, the promise of simple explanations and absolute truths becomes almost irresistible. This is why Bonhoeffer argued that stupidity is partly chosen, even when that choice occurs below the level of conscious awareness. People don't typically wake up one morning and decide to stop thinking critically about important issues. Instead, they gradually surrender their intellectual independence through a series of small compromises, each one seeming reasonable in isolation. They start by trusting certain sources uncritically, because those sources tell them what they want to hear. They begin dismissing contradictory evidence without serious consideration, because examining it would be psychologically uncomfortable. They stop asking probing questions because they've found a worldview that makes them feel safe and important. Each step in this process provides immediate psychological rewards: reduced anxiety, increased sense of belonging, clearer sense of purpose and meaning. But the cumulative effect is the gradual erosion of the capacity for independent thought that Bonhoeffer considered essential to human dignity. The price of mental freedom. Bonhoeffer paid the ultimate price for refusing to surrender his intellectual independence. He was executed by hanging on April 9th, 1945, just weeks before Germany's surrender to Allied forces. According to a fellow prisoner who witnessed his final moments, his last words were, "This is the end, for me, the beginning of life." His sacrifice wasn't just about political resistance to Nazi ideology. It was about defending the very possibility of human thought against systems designed to eliminate independent reasoning. He understood that when people stop thinking independently, they stop being fully human in some essential sense. They become what he called puppets whose strings are pulled by whatever force happens to be strongest at the moment. But Bonhoeffer's final challenge extends beyond his historical context into our contemporary situation. Who stands fast? When the pressure to conform is overwhelming, when thinking independently requires genuine courage, when the cost of truth is higher than the price of comfortable lies, who has the strength and commitment to keep thinking? The answer, Bonhoeffer suggested, isn't found in superior intelligence, advanced education, or special moral qualities. It's found in the daily choice to remain curious rather than certain, to seek truth rather than comfort, to think carefully rather than react quickly to emotional stimuli. These aren't heroic acts in any dramatic sense. They're ordinary practices that become extraordinary when everyone around you has stopped doing them. They require what Bonhoeffer called costly grace, the willingness to pay the personal and social price of intellectual independence. Practical resistance to intellectual captivity. If our brains and social systems are rigged against independent thinking, how do we fight back? The challenge requires both individual practices and structural changes that make intellectual honesty easier and more rewarding than intellectual surrender. On an individual level, we can cultivate what psychologists call intellectual humility, the recognition that our knowledge is always incomplete and potentially wrong. This doesn't mean becoming paralyzed by doubt or unable to make decisions based on available evidence. Instead, it means maintaining the flexibility to update our beliefs when we encounter compelling contradictory evidence. One powerful practice is what we might call intellectual friction, deliberately seeking out thoughtful arguments from people who disagree with us, not necessarily to change our minds, but to test whether our convictions can withstand serious scrutiny. This requires genuine engagement with opposing viewpoints rather than the superficial exposure that often occurs in social media debates. Another essential practice is embracing what researchers call productive ignorance, becoming comfortable with saying, "I don't know," when we actually don't know something. In a culture that rewards confident ignorance over humble uncertainty, admitting gaps in our knowledge becomes a radical act of intellectual integrity. We can also practice slowing down our information consumption and sharing. Before accepting or spreading information that confirms our existing beliefs, we can take time to verify it from independent sources. This brief pause can break the algorithmic cycle that feeds on our emotional reactions and helps us avoid becoming unwitting participants in misinformation campaigns. Perhaps most importantly, we can practice maintaining curiosity in the face of certainty. When we find ourselves absolutely convinced about something, especially something emotionally charged, we can ask what evidence would change our minds. If we can't think of any, that's often a sign that we've moved from evidence-based belief into the realm of ideology. Structural changes for intellectual liberation. Individual practices, while essential, aren't sufficient to address the systemic forces that push us toward intellectual surrender. We also need structural changes that make careful thinking easier and more rewarding than mental passivity. This means requiring social media platforms to disclose their algorithmic biases and how they curate content for individual users. It means funding comprehensive public media literacy campaigns that teach people how to evaluate sources, recognize manipulation techniques, and think critically about information in digital environments. We need to design online platforms that reward intellectual humility over tribal certainty, that promote thoughtful dialogue over emotional reaction, and that create incentives for users to engage with diverse perspectives rather than retreating into echo chambers. Most importantly, we need economic policies that reduce the stress and uncertainty that make people vulnerable to intellectual shortcuts. When people aren't constantly worried about healthcare, housing, education, and employment, they have more mental bandwidth available for careful thinking about complex issues. The goal isn't to create a society of professional philosophers, but to establish conditions where ordinary people can engage in the kind of thoughtful citizenship that democracy requires without sacrificing their economic security or social belonging. The evolutionary challenge. Bonhoeffer's theory was brilliant for its time, but here's what he couldn't have fully anticipated. We're not just dealing with social and psychological pressures toward intellectual surrender. We're facing an evolutionary mismatch between the cognitive abilities that served our ancestors well and the information environment we've created through modern technology. Our brains evolved to handle information from trusted sources in small social groups. We developed the ability to make quick decisions based on limited information because delay could mean death. We learned to trust authority figures and conform to group consensus because these strategies promoted survival and social cohesion. But these same cognitive features become liabilities in an information environment characterized by vast quantities of data from unknown sources, complex problems that require careful analysis over extended periods, and systems specifically designed to exploit our psychological vulnerabilities for commercial or political gain. The challenge we face isn't just about resisting propaganda or thinking more critically about the information we encounter. It's about consciously evolving beyond the cognitive constraints that made us vulnerable to intellectual manipulation in the first place. This requires developing new mental habits and social institutions that compensate for our evolutionary limitations. It means creating buffer zones between our immediate emotional reactions and our important decisions. It means building communities that reward intellectual curiosity and penalize overconfidence. It means designing technologies that enhance rather than exploit our cognitive capabilities. The future of human thinking. We stand at a critical juncture in human history. The same technological capabilities that make sophisticated manipulation possible also offer unprecedented opportunities for intellectual enhancement and collaborative problem solving. Artificial intelligence could be designed to help us think more clearly rather than to exploit our mental weaknesses. Digital platforms could facilitate genuine dialogue rather than tribal warfare. Information systems could promote understanding rather than confusion. But these positive outcomes aren't inevitable. They require conscious choices about how we design our technologies, structure our institutions, and organize our societies. They require the kind of intellectual courage that Bonhoeffer demonstrated. The willingness to think independently even when it's painful, unpopular, or dangerous. The question Bonhoeffer leaves us with isn't whether we're smart enough to avoid stupidity. Intelligence alone clearly isn't sufficient, as demonstrated by the countless examples of brilliant people falling into functional stupidity throughout history. The question is whether we're committed enough to keep thinking when thinking becomes inconvenient, uncomfortable, or costly. In a world that profits from our intellectual surrender, choosing to think carefully and independently becomes one of the most important forms of resistance available to us. It's not just about protecting our own minds from manipulation. It's about defending the very possibility of human wisdom in an age of artificial stupidity. A challenge for our time. Here's what I want you to remember as you navigate the complex information landscape of our contemporary world. Every time you choose curiosity over certainty, evidence over emotion, careful thinking over quick reactions, you're not just protecting your own capacity for independent thought. You're participating in the collective project of maintaining human intellectual freedom in the face of systems designed to eliminate it. The future of human dignity might depend on how we collectively answer Bonhoeffer's challenge. When the pressure to conform is overwhelming, when independent thinking requires genuine courage, when the cost of truth exceeds the price of comfortable lies, will we stand fast? The answer isn't found in heroic gestures or dramatic confrontation with authority. It's found in the daily practices of intellectual integrity that become extraordinary when everyone around us has stopped doing them. It's found in the willingness to remain curious about complex issues rather than settling for simple answers. It's found in the courage to admit uncertainty rather than claiming false certainty. If this exploration has made you question something you thought you knew for certain, that's not a weakness or failure. It's the beginning of intellectual courage. It's the first step toward reclaiming your capacity for independent thought in a world designed to eliminate it. The simple act of thinking carefully about important issues becomes a form of resistance against systems that profit from our mental passivity. In choosing to engage seriously with complex problems rather than accepting easy answers, we're defending not just our own intellectual freedom, but the possibility of human wisdom itself. What belief are you willing to examine seriously this week? What assumption are you prepared to question? What comfortable certainty are you ready to trade for the more difficult but ultimately more rewarding path of intellectual independence? These aren't just personal questions. They're civilizational challenges that will determine whether we become puppets dancing to algorithmic manipulations or thinking beings capable of shaping our own destiny. The choice, as Bonhoeffer understood, is ultimately ours to make. Dishonesty threads through every domain of human society, from whispers in private conversations to sweeping manipulations that reshape political or economic landscapes. Despite this sprawling reach, many individuals only grapple with the nature of lies as needed. They encounter falsehood in a painful personal betrayal, or glimpse it indirectly through the unraveling of a public scandal. Yet deception is neither rare nor peripheral. It courses through history and culture with a potency that begs ongoing study. Mythological depictions of tricksters reveal how societies have long recognized and dramatized the potential benefits and perils of deceit. The trickster archetype, whether called by a name in the stories of ancient Europe, the folklore of Africa, the wisdom tales of Asia, or elsewhere, embodies cunning, subversion, and creative forms of rule-bending. Often, this figure is not purely evil. Instead, the trickster might help mortals learn humility or reveal the vanity of a ruler who believes in his invincibility. Yet the trickster may also wreak havoc with only the slightest concern for the suffering of others, thus underscoring the ambivalence societies feel toward dishonesty.
Hey, I declare I don't know what's got into you.
You heard your mother, Thomas. Now do as she says.
Finally, his folks sent him to see me. There wasn't anything physically wrong with him that I could find, so I began to talk with him. If you've got something on your mind, Tommy, why don't you talk about it?
Well,
We all have our problems, Tommy.
but I can talk about it.
Of course you can. And you know something?
These legends echo in modern narratives, from literary fiction to cinematic tales, reminding us that deception grips the imagination precisely because it both enthralls and destroys. Origins of the trickster, cultural foundations. Early peoples lived in tight-knit groups that depended on cooperation and communal bonds for survival. Within those groups, trust was paramount. One needed to rely on a hunting partner's honesty about the location of prey, for example, or on the sincerity of promises made between families. Yet there existed a place in cultural consciousness for the cunning deceiver as well. Oral traditions carried accounts of individuals or spirits that lied to trick their foes, sometimes upending social order or humiliating those in power. In some traditions, these tales reinforced moral norms by illustrating how liars ultimately faced punishment. In others, the deceitful being could be viewed with admiration, especially if the lies were wielded to topple an oppressive force. One might see parallels in many world mythologies. A disguised god emerges to test the hospitality of mortals. A cheeky animal figure outwits more physically imposing creatures. A disreputable but quick-witted scamp crosses boundaries between worlds. In each of these scenarios, the liar uses half-truths, illusions, or bold fabrications to achieve an end. The moral lessons gleaned can differ. Perhaps the story warns that deception, though powerful, inevitably leads to downfall if wielded excessively. Alternatively, it may imply that clever use of falsehood can unmask arrogance or bring forth growth. Modern society is heir to these ancestral narratives. Even in technologically advanced nations, fables of cunning animals or mischief-making spirits echo in children's media, cautionary tales, and entertainment. One legacy of this cultural heritage is the realization that lying, while often condemned, has long been a recognized tool in human affairs, simultaneously feared for its potential harm and revered for its imaginative potency. Long before the invention of mechanical devices, various harsh or mystical procedures were used in attempts to discern untruths. A suspect might be subjected to painful ordeals or forced to partake in elaborate rituals believed to reveal hidden guilt. Fervent belief in supernatural intervention led communities to assume that if an accused party were truly innocent, a deity or cosmic force would protect them during these ordeals. History records harrowing instances in which those subject to these trials were gravely harmed, casting doubt on the fairness or reliability of such methods. Later epochs saw the birth of more systematic approaches, such as the measuring of bodily responses, sometimes deemed to be under involuntary control. Known collectively as lie detection technologies, these instruments often focus on changes in breathing rate or skin conductance, hypothesizing that deceit triggers detectable physiological stress. Nonetheless, subsequent use cases revealed the flaws. Some individuals can mask these signs, while others who are entirely honest might exhibit stress for myriad reasons unrelated to lying. Courts in many societies have thus displayed caution or outright skepticism about allowing results from these tests as conclusive proof. Contemporary research increasingly looks at linguistic clues, observing the actual words and structures employed by a speaker, rather than relying purely on physical reactivity. The premise is that deception creates a type of mental tension that leads to unconscious shifts in communication. This does not mean that language-based detection is foolproof. Highly practiced or psychologically atypical liars might manipulate their speech with minimal hint of inconsistency. Nonetheless, for the average individual, especially in spontaneous or unplanned contexts, the subtle disruptions introduced by lying can be revealing. Why humans lie, motivations and psychological insight. Deception emerges from a range of motives. Some lies function to preserve self-image or stave off negative consequences. A student might fabricate a story about being ill to avoid explaining incomplete homework. An employee might exaggerate achievements to secure a competitive promotion. In these cases, fear of judgment or punishment often fuels the impulse to lie. By controlling the narrative, the liar aims to avoid blame or to gain an advantage. Another category of deceit is born from empathy, at least at first glance. People sometimes lie to protect loved ones from distressing truths. They might reassure a friend that a situation is better than it is, or omit details they believe would cause needless worry. There is an ongoing ethical debate about whether such half-truths or benevolent misdirections do more good or harm. Some argue that honesty fosters trust and allows for informed decisions, while others counter that shielding vulnerable individuals from harsh realities can be a compassionate act. Yet a separate dimension of lies arises in the form of deep-rooted or habitual dishonesty. Repetitive lying can morph into a habitual behavior, sometimes linked to personality disorders or past traumas. Individuals steeped in this pattern might feel that lying is their only way to navigate everyday demands without exposing themselves to shame or conflict. Others may even derive a sense of control or power by distorting the truth, enjoying the thrill of fooling those around them. In the most extreme circumstances, pathological deceit is part of a broader dysfunction, requiring therapeutic intervention. Philosophical perspectives: absolutism versus contextualism. Philosophers have approached lying through many lenses, often engaging in a lively debate about whether deception can ever be morally defensible. Some expound a stringent absolutism, maintaining that lying is categorically wrong under all circumstances. This position suggests that any deviation from truthfulness undermines the tacit social contract that makes human cooperation possible. If words lose their reliability, the fundamental basis for communication erodes. Others advance a more contextual or relativistic stance, claiming that lying might be justified under specific conditions. Perhaps a well-intentioned deceit thwarts a malicious act or protects an innocent person from a grave injustice. Such scenarios raise the question of whether certain moral rules, including the prohibition on lying, can be overruled by a higher principle, such as preserving life. Although the argument allows lying in dire or extraordinary cases, it does not necessarily condone casual or self-serving falsehoods. A wholly pragmatic view also appears in some texts that emphasize power dynamics and realpolitik. In that context, lying is regarded as one of many instruments a leader might use to maintain order or secure beneficial outcomes. Critics of this line of thought argue that it corrodes trust, making it difficult to forge genuine cooperation. Supporters claim that illusions, half-truths, or strategic misdirections might be required in a complex world where not every stakeholder acts ethically. Language patterns that reveal deceit. One of the more intriguing facets of lie detection is the way individuals subtly alter their speech when they deviate from the truth. Researchers in communications have highlighted a few recurring tendencies that appear more often in deceptive statements than in sincere ones. Removal of personal pronouns. Liars may unconsciously reduce references to I or me, instead relying on passive constructions or third-person usage, creating psychological distance from the falsehood. Greater use of negative language. A speaker weaving a falsehood might introduce more negative words or sentiments. This could manifest as complaining about irrelevant matters, inserting unpleasant descriptors, or generally allowing frustration to seep in. Some scholars link it to subconscious guilt. Simple yet overly polished narratives, fabricated stories, can sometimes sound suspiciously uncomplex, lacking the natural messiness or contradictory details often found in real events. At the same time, a liar may weave in excessive details about peripheral matters to lend plausibility, resulting in a strange contrast between an oversimplified main plot and bloated tangents. Inconsistency in emotional tone. The emotional arc that accompanies a truthful story tends to unfold with internal logic, especially if the event had a personal impact. A deceptive account might feature inconsistent or exaggerated emotional cues that do not align smoothly with the content of the story. Despite these patterns, it bears reiteration that language-based detection is probabilistic, not definitive. Some truth-tellers may, for instance, speak in an impersonal style due to shyness, or use negative language because they are genuinely upset. Still, for investigators, therapists, or everyday listeners, noting these shifts can be valuable in deciding when to probe further. Developing skills to spot dishonesty. As social beings, humans often pick up on cues, facial expressions, tone of voice, body posture, that suggest another individual is not being straightforward. However, relying on folk wisdom such as shifty eyes can be misleading. Eye contact avoidance may indeed appear in dishonest behavior, but it might also reflect social anxiety or cultural norms about respect. Similarly, fidgeting can point to either deception or simple nervousness, unrelated to any lie. Those seeking to refine their ability to detect falsehoods can approach the task holistically. Observe baseline behaviors. Before concluding, one should know how a person typically speaks, gestures, and phrases ideas in relaxed, truthful contexts. Subsequent changes may offer clues. Pay attention to details over time. Ask clarifying questions at intervals. If a story shifts significantly upon repetition or grows overly padded in ways that contradict earlier statements, suspicion arises. Remain aware of see the context. A small slip in body language or an unusual turn of phrase might not mean much on its own, but when convergent signs consistently point to possible deceit, the likelihood is stronger. Practice empathic listening. Paradoxically, an empathic stance, fully focusing on the speaker's words and emotional cues without immediate judgment, often yields deeper insight. A liar might feel compelled to elaborate untruths in ways that gradually reveal contradictions. It is crucial to maintain ethical caution. Overzealous suspicion can harm relationships or reputations, especially if an innocent person is wrongly labeled dishonest. Similarly, the process of lie detection should not become an excuse for paranoia or manipulative interrogation techniques that themselves breach trust. Undermining relationships and institutions. Even minor lies, repeated frequently, can seed long-term interpersonal conflict. Within a marriage or close friendship, discovering that a partner lied about finances, romantic involvements, or significant life decisions can trigger profound betrayal. This erosion of trust may linger for years, if not permanently, casting doubt on the authenticity of any future communication. Similarly, in professional environments, concealed mistakes or distorted performance metrics might temporarily protect an individual's image or promote them to a higher position. Over time, however, the organization risks a culture of suspicion and turf guarding that undermines collaboration. On a larger scale, entire institutions, government agencies, corporations, or media outlets may fall prey to systematic falsehood. Whether motivated by profit, fear of scandal, or ideological goals, institutional deceit festers in secrecy, sometimes for extended periods. Yet history shows many cases in which these falsehoods eventually come to light, prompting a crisis of confidence in the institution's leadership or mission. In a democratic context, repeated deception by elected representatives can breed cynicism among the electorate, weakening the bonds of civic participation and respect for governance. The educational mandate, teaching honesty. Educators, from early childhood guides to professors in advanced academia, often frame truth-telling as a cornerstone virtue. School settings introduce moral lessons through stories that show the harsh consequences of dishonesty and the esteem that follows honesty. Yet beyond moral exhortation, educators can adopt concrete exercises that develop critical thinking and a deeper understanding of truth in various domains. Some possibilities: analytical reading assignments. By encouraging learners to dissect articles and essays and noting potential biases or logical gaps, schools foster a habit of questioning and fact-checking. Debates on real or fictional cases. Group discussions in which students must argue either for or against a character's choice to lie can highlight ethical complexities. Participants gain empathy for the dilemmas that drive deception, even as they weigh the broader impact on trust. Role plays of difficult conversations. Learners can practice providing honest feedback in role-play scenarios, balancing compassion with clarity. This experience helps them see that truth need not be brutal or tactless. Media literacy projects. In an age dominated by social platforms, the ability to spot doctored images, misleading headlines, and conspiracy thinking is essential. Guiding students in evaluating source credibility prepares them to recognize falsehoods well beyond the classroom. Such initiatives strengthen an internalized appreciation for honesty, moving beyond simplistic "do not lie" admonitions into nuanced reasoning skills. Learners discover that truth, while sometimes uncomfortable or complex, enables more informed decision-making and healthier relationships. Personal strategies to avoid telling lies. It is one thing to bemoan the proliferation of dishonesty in the world. It is another to hold oneself accountable. Cultivating personal authenticity requires both practical steps and introspective self-awareness. Inventory one's stress points. Reflect on situations where lying feels most tempting. Some individuals lie in their professional roles out of fear of losing status. Others fib to relatives or friends when social obligations become overwhelming. Identifying these triggers helps a person proactively plan for a more truthful response. Rehearse honest explanations. In many scenarios, a gentle yet direct explanation can avert the need for creative deceit. For example, instead of citing an invented emergency to avoid a gathering, one can simply say, "I appreciate the invitation, but I need personal downtime." Seek support from accountability partners. Sharing the goal of honesty with a trusted friend, mentor, or therapist can lessen the difficulty of following through. Mutual encouragement and understanding can create a culture of openness within the relationship. Set boundaries rather than deceive. Often people lie because they feel pressured to share details or commit to events. Firm but respectful boundary setting can reduce the sense of entrapment. Stating, "I prefer not to talk about that aspect of my personal life," might be uncomfortable, but is ultimately more honest than weaving a cover story. Acknowledge mistakes candidly. When slip-ups occur, whether in professional projects or personal matters, admitting them early and taking responsibility can build credibility. While it may lead to short-term embarrassment, it prevents the accumulating stress of maintaining a false facade. Scholarly works on lying and honesty. Students of deception can explore a tapestry of books that dive into its many facets, from psychological experiments to in-depth case studies of famous scandals. Some authors concentrate on micro-expressions, minimalistic facial cues thought to flash on a person's face when they struggle to reconcile hidden feelings. Others analyze speech patterns in court transcripts or political addresses, mapping the linguistic footprints of evasion or denial. A separate group, informed by sociology, might emphasize how communal norms and power structures create a hospitable environment for falsehood to flourish. Readers wishing for a broad-based introduction can seek out volumes that blend anecdotal evidence with empirical research, offering tips and frameworks for everyday lie detection. In contrast, specialized academic monographs might tackle narrower aspects, such as how cultural norms mediate the line between polite discretion and outright lying, or how children's capacity for deception evolves with their cognitive development. Varying cultural attitudes toward deception. Truthfulness is rarely a one-size-fits-all concept across cultures. In some regions, directness and blunt honesty are prized, with the expectation that individuals say exactly what they mean. Critiques of others or negative feedback might be given openly, with minimal sugarcoating. In these communities, a lie, even one deemed minor, can be met with significant disapproval. By contrast, other cultures prioritize social harmony, favoring nuanced statements that avoid offense or confrontation. In those contexts, certain omissions or mild misrepresentations might be classified as kindness, not deceit. The aim is to preserve face and maintain cooperative relationships, especially in hierarchical social structures. Outsiders to these cultures may mistake such indirect communication as dishonest, while insiders may perceive it as a gesture of respect. Spiritual and religious teachings, similarly, offer varied stances. Many admonish followers to be scrupulously truthful, linking honesty to divine virtues. Yet theological traditions often acknowledge complex moral situations. Some teachings frame deception as permissible if it prevents greater harm, underscoring that each incident must be judged carefully. Such positions reflect the challenge of reconciling moral absolutes with a world rife with conflicts of duty. Exercises for detecting misinformation. Beyond interpersonal contexts, modern life demands discernment in the face of widespread digital content. A barrage of news updates, blog posts, op-eds, and social media commentary can make it challenging to separate genuine reporting from skewed narratives. Recognizing misinformation is itself a subset of lie detection. Some exercises can sharpen this skill. Cross-referencing news sources. Encourage the habit of verifying a sensational claim by consulting multiple reputable outlets or expert analyses. If a major story appears in only one questionable source, consider waiting for corroboration. Spotting emotional manipulation. Articles or posts aiming to exploit readers' outrage, fear, or triumph can sometimes rely on misleading headlines. A calmer, more balanced tone does not guarantee truthfulness, but hyperbolic emotional triggers should prompt heightened caution. Inspecting photographs and other media. With advanced editing software now widely accessible, images and videos can be deceptively altered. Checking for visual inconsistencies, like mismatched lighting or artifacts of sloppy editing, can reveal tampering. Tracing original reports. Social platforms often feature secondary or tertiary accounts of an incident. Attempting to find the original publication, interview, or research study reduces the risk of relying on rumors or out-of-context tidbits. Self-deception, the blind spot of honesty. Even more perplexing than lying to others is the phenomenon of lying to oneself. psychology notes that human beings have a remarkable capacity to reshape or selectively filter their memories, feelings, and interpretations of events to maintain a comforting self-image. In times of failure, for instance, one might externalize blame entirely, convincing oneself that no personal mistakes were made. Alternatively, a person might persist in a relationship that is unhealthy, telling themselves that everything is fine or that the other party will change. Such self-deception might offer short-term relief, protecting the individual from feelings of inadequacy, guilt, or heartbreak. However, long-term costs include stunted emotional growth, a distorted perception of reality, and increased vulnerability to external manipulations. If one cannot face personal shortcomings or illusions, how can one differentiate truth from falsehood in the outside world? Indeed, self-deception stands at the heart of some of the most damaging forms of dishonesty, since it robs a person of the internal grounding necessary for genuine self-evaluation. Professional discourse around deceit. In certain domains, the ability to detect lies is professional bread and butter. Investigators, intelligence agents, and psychologists specializing in forensic contexts all aim to perfect nuanced methods of analysis. However, challenges abound. Some criminals show little remorse, bypassing guilt-related stress signals, while others might paradoxically exhibit strong emotional reactions despite speaking the truth due to fear or trauma. The professional's role is thus part art, part science, combining knowledge of psychological patterns with astute observation and carefully structured questioning. In business, many corporations strive for transparent ethics, cognizant that even well-concealed falsehoods might emerge one day, eroding brand value and trust. Governance bodies sometimes mandate audits and compliance checks to deter creative accounting or misleading public statements, yet corporate cover-ups still occur. Revelations of falsified test data or misrepresented financials can spark massive repercussions for employees, shareholders, and consumers. Some argue that embedding an honest culture from the executive suite down to frontline staff offers the best inoculation against such calamitous deceptions. Technological potential and pitfalls. Digital technologies hold promise for real-time linguistic analysis, theoretically sifting through emails, messages, or recorded conversations to flag potential lies based on word choice, phrasing patterns, or emotional undertones. Such a prospect provokes a storm of ethical debates. On one hand, an automated system able to highlight suspicious communications could help identify fraud or protect vulnerable groups from scams. On the other, it raises serious privacy concerns. Do we want an ever-present filter that monitors our words, potentially mislabeling jokes, metaphors, or cultural expressions as lies? Developers of these systems also face the challenge of bias. If an algorithm is trained primarily on data from one linguistic group or culture, it may incorrectly judge the communication style of another group as deceptive. The risk of false positives, especially among marginalized communities or non-native speakers, is significant. An over-reliance on technology might obscure the complexity of human communication and hamper the role of empathy and situational context in discerning truth. Illustrative public scandals. Large-scale deceptions in the public arena make for dramatic headlines. Past corporate schemes in various industries, in which unscrupulous executives masked true financial standings or buried adverse scientific findings, demonstrate how lies can take hold in organizational culture. When exposed, these scandals can lead to bankruptcies, widespread economic ruin, and even humanitarian crises if the deception involves critical safety or environmental risks. Political cover-ups also furnish cautionary tales. History includes instances of high-level leaders who assured citizens that no wrongdoing had taken place, only to be undone by overwhelming evidence to the contrary. Public trust, once violated, can be challenging to restore. Efforts to rebuild credibility might span years and require transparent disclosures, legal reforms, and leadership changes. In each of these examples, the question arises, were those at the helm of the deception themselves self-deluded? Did they truly believe in their justifications, or did they cynically decide that the facade would never crack? The intricacy of motivations can be staggering. Some conspirators rationalize their actions as necessary for a perceived greater good, while others simply desire to reap personal gains. Regardless, the fallout when lies are laid bare highlights the destructive ripple effects such dishonesty inflicts on entire communities. Personal consequences of unmasking lies. On a more intimate level, individuals who have concealed significant facts, perhaps major debts, hidden relationships, or fabricated accomplishments, often describe a paradoxical sense of both dread and relief when the truth emerges. The dread arises from fear of judgment, potential loss of relationships, or derailment of professional prospects. The relief stems from no longer having to maintain the exhausting mental choreography required to keep a lie in motion. For the deceived parties, reactions range from profound anger to a sense of confusion about what else might be untrue. Rebuilding trust in such contexts is a fragile process that demands consistent honesty thereafter, genuine atonement, and the willingness of all involved to address the underlying causes of the lie. While reconciliation is possible, it usually requires a long period of re-establishing credibility through tangible, demonstrable changes in behavior. Systemic deceit, entire networks of collusion. Beyond corporate or governmental incidents, systemic deceit can arise in any group dynamic where members face pressures to conform or protect a collective image. Academic circles, for instance, have suffered from cases in which research findings were fabricated or manipulated to align with funding interests or personal ambitions. Peers might remain silent if challenging the falsehood threatens their own standing or blocks future collaborations. Likewise, certain social or religious communities might discourage members from airing doubts about core tenets or leaders' conduct. This environment can foster a pervasive sense that some truths must never be spoken openly. In such atmospheres, maintaining appearances supplants open inquiry. Over time, the gulf between official claims and lived reality can widen dangerously, setting the stage for internal crises when suppressed truths leak out. Recognizing these patterns helps underscore that dishonest behavior is not merely an individual failing. It can reflect institutional structures, social norms, and collective fears. The remedy often requires courageous whistleblowing, cultural shifts in accountability, and leadership that values transparency above public relations gloss. Transcending lies in a digital era. The modern digital environment provides unprecedented opportunities for self-expression. It also encourages curated personas, partial disclosures, and illusions that might be mistaken for genuine truths. Social media users may present idealized versions of their lives, or propagate rumors without rigorous fact-checking. Online anonymity, at times, emboldens people to fabricate outlandish claims or adopt fictitious identities. This proliferation of illusions can cultivate cynicism in those who realize how easy it is to weaponize misinformation. Yet technology also empowers everyday citizens to fact-check in ways unthinkable in earlier centuries. Investigative journalists and civil society groups harness open-source tools, crowdsourced investigations, and instant global communication to expose hidden realities. The simultaneous presence of both advanced fabrication capabilities and sophisticated verification techniques forms a paradoxical landscape. Maintaining an ethos of honesty in such a climate demands not only vigilance, but also a willingness to refine one's standards of truth-telling in every interaction, whether digital or face-to-face. When white lies multiply. Small untruths, often spoken to avoid hurting someone's feelings or to smooth over an awkward situation may seem innocuous. Declining a friend's invitation by pretending to have another engagement, or exaggerating a compliment about a meal that was mediocre, can feel like a kindness. But the habit of such small fibs can accumulate, silently teaching a person that lying is an acceptable shortcut whenever the truth is mildly uncomfortable. Over a lifetime, these small lies can expand into a pattern of avoidance. The speaker may lose practice in diplomatic but honest communication, resorting to falsehood as a default. Alternatively, they might develop self-justifications. Everyone fibs like this. It's not hurting anyone. Or, people prefer a sweet lie to a blunt truth. In reality, repeated mild dishonesty can degrade self-trust, leaving an individual unsure of their moral stance. It can also create subtle barriers with loved ones who might sense a lack of genuine expression. Admittedly, life sometimes requires a gentle approach. Truthfulness does not mandate rudeness or a total exposure of private feelings. It is possible to offer partial truths, set boundaries, or simply say less. The crucial element is ensuring that what is said remains aligned with reality, so that the overall message does not intentionally mislead. In that sense, the art of telling the truth gracefully involves discernment, empathy, and a willingness to accept short-term discomfort for the sake of long-term integrity. Stages of life and varied deceptions. From the early years of childhood to the reflections of late adulthood, the kinds of lies told and the justifications behind them evolve. Children may lie out of fear of punishment or a fragile desire to be perceived as good. Teenagers, seeking autonomy and peer acceptance, might practice more deliberate deceit, shaping narratives that fit social or family expectations. A university student might lie about their past to impress new acquaintances, while a parent might conceal certain truths to provide reassurance to children. Adulthood brings its pressures. Workplace competition, relationship complexities, and financial responsibilities can pile up, making the lure of lies more pronounced. Some adults decide that full candor is ideal, yet find it challenging to live up to intense or complicated encounters. Others become adept at rationalizing dishonest tactics, especially if they interpret them as necessary for personal success. In later years, some individuals experience a reckoning. Tired of pretenses, they may embrace a more fearless honesty, finding relief in the freedom from illusions. Alternatively, they might carry on with entrenched patterns of insincerity, unwilling or unable to break habits long entrenched. Observers can find both cautionary and inspirational examples of how different life trajectories handle or mishandle honesty. Spiritual calls for truthfulness. Sacred texts from many religious traditions urge adherents to be forthright, linking truth to moral or spiritual purity. Some place truth-telling among core ethical commands, framing any lie as a spiritual transgression. Others acknowledge complicated moral terrain, allowing that lesser untruths might be justified to save an innocent life or prevent severe harm, a stance sometimes described as using a lesser evil to avert a greater one. In mystical or contemplative strands of various faiths, the emphasis often falls on aligning speech with a deeper sense of reality. Speech becomes a potent force, shaping relationships and the speaker's spiritual well-being. According to such teachings, the act of speaking truth fosters harmony with cosmic order, while deception seeds internal dissonance that distances the soul from enlightenment or divine connection. Mental health intersections. Persistent lying can erode an individual's psychological welfare, generating guilt, anxiety, or the stress of holding multiple contrived stories in mind. In certain clinical pictures, lying surfaces as a symptom or coping mechanism. For instance, a person dealing with intense social anxiety might lie to avoid gatherings, rationalizing it as necessary self-preservation. Another might embellish personal achievements to hide crippling self-doubt. Therapeutic interventions, whether individual or group-based, can address these underlying drivers by exploring the emotions fueling deception, clients learn alternative ways to handle the triggers that once compelled them to lie. The process can be challenging, as confronting the truth about one's limitations or mistakes may be painfully vulnerable. Yet the reward is often a more stable sense of self, liberated from the constant worry of being caught in a lie. Fostering collective honesty. Nurturing a climate in which truth flourishes requires sustained effort across multiple fronts. Family life that encourages open communication, schools that teach critical thinking, workplaces that celebrate transparency, and public institutions that uphold rigorous accountability. Together, these structures anchor a culture of honesty. By contrast, if any part of this ecosystem rewards or tacitly endorses deceit, rot can spread. Reinforcing a culture of truth might involve open forum policies. Institutions can implement channels where members can safely report concerns or discrepancies without fear of retaliation. Whether at a company or a university, accessible whistleblower systems deter misconduct. Praise for integrity. Acknowledging employees, students, or citizens who choose the harder path of truth in difficult moments highlights the real-world benefits of honesty. Recognition and celebration can shift norms and demonstrate that sincerity is neither naive nor undervalued. Checks and balances. In governance, independent bodies and free media play a critical watchdog role. Transparency laws, independent auditing, and journalistic freedom all curb institutional temptations to lie by threatening exposure. Reflective rituals. Some communities or organizations adopt practices encouraging periodic self-examination. Group discussions, retreats, or even shared readings about honesty can open dialogue on moral dilemmas, preventing complacency. Illuminating fiction and reality through literature. Novels and plays often dramatize lies, exploring their destructive or redemptive impacts. A well-crafted narrative about a character undone by deception can leave lasting impressions about the perils of falsehood. Meanwhile, works that celebrate truth-telling heroes affirm the belief that sincerity stands as a core virtue. Outside fiction, memoirs, and investigative non-fiction detail real episodes where hidden truths came to light, exposing wrongdoing or sparking reform. Students of literature might examine how a protagonist's gradual entanglement in lies mirrors psychological theories regarding cognitive dissonance or repressed guilt. Others may look at how certain authors employ unreliable narrators, using the first-person perspective of a liar to keep readers questioning every statement. Such literary devices show the complexity of deception and how it can engage an audience on intellectual and emotional levels by playing with the line between fact and fabrication. Case studies in business, politics, and beyond. Multiple industries have weathered deception-based crises. There have been documented situations of falsified emission data, manipulated test results, or inflated product claims that eventually unleashed scandals. In political spheres, cover-ups of misconduct, covert operations, or financial improprieties have led to resignations and reshaped public debate. Even in charitable and non-governmental organizations, misrepresentations about how funds are used can shatter donor trust, unraveling years of philanthropic progress. In analyzing these events, observers often note that the short-term gains from deception pale in comparison to the eventual long-term destruction of credibility. Indeed, once the public perceives that a leading institution or figure has lied, anger and skepticism overshadow accomplishments that might otherwise have been lauded. Rebuilding goodwill can require profound structural and leadership changes, combined with ongoing transparency about reformed practices. Personal recovery from revealed deceptions. For the individual liar, the moment of exposure, though traumatic, can prove transformative. While the immediate fallout may include broken ties and professional setbacks, candid confrontation of the root cause behind the falsehood can launch a healing process. The path forward might involve apologizing to those harmed, seeking counseling, and committing to a different standard of honesty. In some cases, faith communities or support groups provide frameworks for atonement and a fresh start. For the deceived, a spectrum of emotional processing unfolds. Anger and disbelief might first arise, followed by sadness or self-doubt about not recognizing the lie sooner. Over time, some move toward forgiveness, acknowledging human frailty and trusting in demonstrations of changed behavior. Others cannot bridge the breach, opting for a clean break from the individual or institution that broke faith. Both resolutions underscore the potent effect lies can have on forging or shattering bonds. The entangled web of systemic lies. When deceit becomes ingrained in a broad social or institutional structure, unraveling it demands collective effort. One person blowing the whistle may face intimidation from peers or superiors determined to protect the status quo. Even if the evidence is compelling, entrenched power dynamics can stifle reforms, at least temporarily. Nonetheless, history suggests that resolute truth-seekers sometimes manage to bring about substantial change by rallying public attention or enlisting allies in oversight bodies. The resistance that whistleblowers face reveals that cultural norms can be complicit in preserving illusions. Employees might prefer not to lose comfortable routines. Devotees of a charismatic leader might dismiss negative revelations as fabrications by shedding light on how entire networks collaborate, either actively or passively, in supporting deceit. Researchers highlight the difficulty of achieving transparency. They also hint at the remarkable courage displayed by those who break the cycle. Truth in an age of data overload. Modern society grapples with a glut of data. Unending feeds of social media, micro-targeted ads, streaming commentary, and near-infinite online archives. Within this massive flow, countless bits of information are inaccurate, incomplete, or distorted. Navigating such an environment requires both critical literacy and an ethos that values honest discourse. If individuals approach online interactions with the same care they might show in face-to-face communication, verifying facts before sharing, labeling speculation as such, and owning errors when discovered, digital spaces might become less susceptible to rumors and manipulative hoaxes. This ethic, however, conflicts with the desire for quick confirmations of one's biases. Many succumb to the temptation of confirming headlines that align with pre-existing beliefs. Self-deception re-enters the equation, as individuals might prefer comforting lies over inconvenient truths. Maintaining vigilance against such impulses means regularly questioning one's assumptions and acknowledging that the truth is not always easy to confirm. Illusions in love and economics. A further lens through which we might consider deception is the realm of love and relationships, where romantic illusions can blur reality. Partners might delude themselves about fundamental incompatibilities, choosing to emphasize an idealized vision instead of confronting genuine issues, from statements of unconditional devotion that mask unresolved resentments to grand but insincere promises about the future. Such illusions can prolong relationships that lack honesty at their core. When the facade eventually shatters, both individuals are left with a sense of betrayal, confusion, and a backlog of unresolved conflict. Economic illusions can similarly steer entire markets or personal financial decisions. Investors might inflate the potential of a fledgling enterprise, whether deliberately or under a sincere but misguided optimism. Shrewd marketers sometimes capitalize on the human tendency to see what one wishes to see. Consumers invest in products that promise miraculous results or place faith in pyramid-like schemes that collapse once enough people recognize their structural unsustainability. The line between a hopeful forecast and a deceptive pitch can be thin, leading to devastating crashes if illusions are allowed to spiral unchecked. Though the arenas of love and economics differ in emotional tone, they both show how deception can breed dependencies and maintain illusions that stave off immediate discomfort. A couple might stay together due to the comforting lie that everything is fine, just as a buyer might continue to pour resources into a shaky investment out of denial or an unwillingness to accept losses. The aftermath of such illusions, once they fail, underscores that facing difficult truths early can save significant emotional, psychological, or financial costs in the long run. Illusions in conflict and propaganda. Warfare and geopolitical conflicts provide yet another vista of collective and institutionalized deception. Propaganda campaigns, which distort information to mold public opinion, have existed as long as rivalries between nations. In some cases, entire populations have been persuaded of the righteousness of a cause through carefully orchestrated illusions, demonizing opponents via selective imagery or fabricated atrocities. Meanwhile, governments under pressure to maintain morale may omit unflattering data about battlefield losses or resource shortages, painting a false picture of imminent victory. Historically, individuals who uncovered discrepancies between official announcements and lived reality might face accusations of disloyalty. Only years later, through documentation or eyewitness accounts, do broader swaths of the public learn the scale of misinformation perpetrated in the name of national unity. This cycle highlights how powerful deception becomes when tied to patriotism, fear, or communal pride. Propaganda capitalizes on emotional responses, stifling critical thought by casting dissent as betrayal. Modern digital networks amplify these dynamics, enabling rumors and outright falsehoods to circulate widely in a matter of minutes. The challenge grows. How can one remain informed and alert without succumbing to paranoid suspicion of every communication? This dilemma echoes again and again, reminding us that truth is not guaranteed to triumph without active, sustained efforts to protect it. Tying the threads together. Dishonesty thrives in murky conditions, whether on a personal level, where fear, shame, or ambition drives a person to fabricate stories, or on a collective plane, where entire institutions mask flaws to preserve reputations. The seductive pull of lying stems from a belief that illusion can offer a more favorable outcome than reality. Yet illusions often demand ongoing maintenance, risking a collapse that causes even more significant harm once exposed. Examining lies through psychology, we see how anxiety and self-preservation push many to obscure the truth. Turning to philosophy, we engage in deep debates over whether lying is ever permissible as a means to a nobler end, or if sincerity stands above all else as a guiding value. Exploring cultural variations and spiritual teachings, we recognize the wide but intricate patterns by which societies attempt to delineate acceptable from unacceptable deception. Meanwhile, language-based approaches open new doors to decoding how subtle transformations in speech and writing might reveal hidden guilt or conflict. Educational efforts in analytical reading, critical thinking, and ethical discourse aim to raise future generations better prepared to detect and repel the contagion of lying. On a personal front, individuals committed to honesty can institute reflection and accountability in their daily lives, learning to face discomfort without retreating into fabricated tales. In a world often fogged by half-truths and deliberate misdirections, striving for honesty becomes a beacon of clarity. Though lying may appear to solve immediate problems, spare someone's feelings, secure a promotion, avert punishment, it frequently exacts a steep toll on one's inner equilibrium and outer relationships. The tangle of perpetuating a lie can lead to stress, guilt, and the potential for explosive fallout if the mask slips. Entire organizations, even entire nations, have witnessed the social and economic collapse that accompanies unmasked deception. By appreciating the historical and cultural significance of falsehood, we grasp why it remains so persistent. Myths show its ambiguous appeal, legal codes have tried to root it out, and philosophical traditions debate its moral status. Nevertheless, research into linguistic signals and psychological patterns suggests we are not powerless to sense when we are being fooled, nor are we unable to examine our motives and refrain from crossing that threshold into deception ourselves. Each effort to uphold truth, even in minor daily matters, serves as a stitch in the social fabric, reinforcing a shared belief that words can still carry real meaning. At its core, Honesty asks a fundamental question. Do we value authenticity enough to weather the vulnerability it brings? If the answer is yes, then the challenging but ultimately uplifting journey of consistent truthfulness becomes possible. We create space for genuine connection, collaborative problem-solving, and mutual respect. Over the long sweep of history, illusions, no matter how grand, tend to fade, yet truths, however inconvenient, anchor progress. By embracing truth on an individual and collective scale, we harness a potent force for emotional well-being, moral integrity, and communal trust. You know that feeling, don't you? When someone's standing right beside you saying all the right things, but something deep in your gut whispers that it's all wrong. Their words sound friendly enough, but there's this nagging sensation, like trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. When someone harbors resentment, envy, or outright hatred, they might think they're masters of disguise. But the truth has a way of revealing itself through the smallest gestures, the briefest expressions, the spaces between words, the art of disguised contempt. Some people have turned sarcasm into a weapon of choice. They'll deliver cutting remarks, wrapped in the pretty bow of humor, targeting exactly what they know will sting. When you call them out, suddenly you're the problem, you're too sensitive or can't take a joke. But pay attention to the pattern. If their jokes consistently leave you feeling smaller, if they repeatedly poke at the same tender spots, you're not witnessing humor, you're experiencing calculated cruelty. Jung understood that we often project our own shadows onto others. When someone repeatedly mocks certain aspects of who you are, they're revealing the parts of themselves they can't stand to face. The saboteur's subtle touch. Not all sabotage comes with dramatic explosions. Sometimes it's as quiet as forgotten messages, as innocent as miscommunication, as simple as conveniently omitting crucial details. The friend who somehow always forgets to pass along important information, the colleague whose honest mistakes seem to happen at the worst possible moments. If these incidents cluster around your biggest opportunities or most vulnerable moments, start paying attention. Jung noted that people who can't face their own failures often unconsciously work to trip up others. It's easier to dim someone else's light than to work on kindling your own flame. The competition you never signed up for. Every achievement becomes a race you didn't know you were running. Share good news and suddenly they're sharing better news. Mention a success and they've got a bigger one waiting in the wings. What should be a moment of celebration becomes an exhausting game of one-upmanship. This relentless need to overshadow stems from deep insecurity. Some people can't bear to see you shine because your light illuminates everything they feel they lack. Jung recognized that we often resent in others what we struggle to develop in ourselves. Your success becomes their mirror, reflecting back their own perceived inadequacies. Support that feels like quicksand. Their support feels hollow, doesn't it? When you're struggling, they minimize your problems or find reasons why they can't help. When you succeed, their congratulations sound like they're reading from a script. Flat, forced, utterly unconvincing. Watch for this pattern during life's pivotal moments. True friends show up when it matters. Fair-weather supporters have a remarkable talent for being mysteriously unavailable during your crucial moments. Then, acting surprised, they missed everything important. Control wearing the mask of care. I'm only looking out for you. How many times have you heard that phrase from someone who seems determined to run your life? They question every decision, doubt every choice, and somehow always know what's best for you, which usually means keeping you small and dependent. Real care empowers, false care imprisons. If their advice consistently leaves you feeling less confident rather than more capable, you're not receiving guidance. You're experiencing manipulation. Jung understood that people who can't manage their own inner chaos often try to control others as a way of avoiding their own emotional turmoil. The Whisper Campaign. They won't confront you directly, that would be too honest. Instead, they prefer the shadows, spreading carefully crafted criticism and conveniently distorted stories about you to mutual friends and colleagues. You might not even realize it's happening until you notice the subtle shifts in how others treat you. This indirect assassination of character is particularly insidious because it works slowly, poisoning relationships you didn't even know were at risk. Jung observed that people often project their own insecurities by trying to tarnish others' reputations. When someone consistently speaks poorly of you behind your back, they're usually revealing more about their own character than yours. The Joy Thieves. Pay attention to how people react to your wins. Genuine friends light up when you succeed. Your happiness becomes their happiness. But joy thieves, they practically wither before your eyes. You'll see it in their strained smiles, their abrupt topic changes, their need to immediately redirect attention to themselves. "Oh, that's nice," they'll say, with all the enthusiasm of someone commenting on the weather. Or worse, they'll minimize your achievement. "Well, it's not that impressive," or "I did something similar last year." These aren't just thoughtless comments, they're glimpses into a soul that struggles with your success because it highlights their own perceived failures. The body never lies. Here's where it gets really interesting. Words can deceive, but bodies tell the truth. Watch for the micro-expressions that slip through their careful facade. The flash of irritation when you share good news, the tension that creeps into their shoulders when you're speaking, the way their smile never quite reaches their eyes. Jung believed that our unconscious minds communicate in ways our conscious selves can't control. That forced laugh, that stiffening when you mention an accomplishment, that subtle stepping back when you're excited about something. These aren't random behaviors, they're involuntary confessions of true feelings. Trust your instincts when something feels off. Your intuition is picking up signals that your logical mind might dismiss. The body and the unconscious don't lie, even when someone desperately wants them to. The truth will surface. Recognizing these patterns isn't about becoming paranoid or suspicious of everyone around you. It's about protecting your energy and understanding the dynamics at play in your relationships. Some people genuinely celebrate your success and want to see you thrive. Others, despite their words, harbor feelings they may not even fully understand themselves. The beautiful thing about awareness is that it gives you choices. You can't control how others feel about you, but you can control how much access they have to your life, your energy, and your peace of mind. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for both yourself and them is to create some healthy distance. Remember, their hidden hostility says nothing about your worth and everything about their own unresolved shadows. Keep shining, keep growing, and keep trusting that inner voice that knows the difference between genuine care and carefully concealed resentment. This phenomenon isn't new to the modern world. It's as old as human consciousness itself. Carl Gustav Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist whose insights into the human psyche continue to illuminate the darkest corners of our collective understanding, identified this as an encounter with what he termed the shadow. Jung's concept of the shadow represents those aspects of ourselves that we find unacceptable, the parts we've banished to the unconscious realm because they threaten our idealized self-image. Yet these rejected fragments don't simply disappear. They manifest in our interactions with others, often in ways we don't consciously recognize. The shadow operates like a psychological projection system, casting our disowned traits onto the people around us. When someone harbors deep-seated resentment, envy, or even hatred toward another person, they rarely express these feelings directly. Instead, these emotions seep through the cracks of their conscious control, revealing themselves in patterns of behavior that the trained eye can learn to recognize. The art lies not in becoming paranoid or overly suspicious, but in developing the wisdom to distinguish between genuine care and carefully concealed contempt. Human relationships exist in layers, much like geological formations built up over time. The surface layer, the one most visible to casual observation, consists of social pleasantries, expected responses, and culturally appropriate behaviors. But beneath this lies the bedrock of true feeling, and sometimes that bedrock is fractured with veins of hostility that have been compressed under years of social pressure and personal denial. Understanding these hidden dynamics requires us to become students of human nature in its rawest form. It demands that we develop what Jung called conscious observation, the ability to see beyond the surface presentation to the psychological currents flowing underneath. This skill isn't about becoming cynical or losing faith in human goodness. Rather, it's about protecting our energy and emotional well-being by recognizing when someone's conscious presentation doesn't align with their unconscious reality. The journey into recognizing hidden hostility begins with understanding that most people aren't consciously aware of their own shadow projections. The colleague who consistently undermines your projects while offering surface-level support likely doesn't wake up each morning plotting your downfall. Instead, they're driven by unconscious forces, perhaps feelings of inadequacy, fear of being overshadowed, or unresolved competitive drives that express themselves through seemingly innocent actions and reactions. The weaponization of humor. The first pattern that emerges in relationships touched by hidden hostility is the transformation of humor into a delivery system for contempt. This isn't the warm, inclusive laughter that bonds people together, nor is it the self-deprecating humor that demonstrates humility and humanity. Instead, it's a carefully crafted form of psychological aggression that allows the perpetrator to inflict wounds while maintaining plausible deniability. Think of sarcasm as a double-edged sword wrapped in silk. The person wielding it gets to deliver cutting remarks while simultaneously claiming innocence. After all, they were just joking. This form of disguised contempt often targets the very qualities or achievements that the hostile person most envies or resents. They'll make jokes about your success, mock your aspirations, or consistently poke at your insecurities, all while maintaining the thin veneer of playful banter. The truly insidious nature of this behavior lies in how it makes the target question their own reactions. When you feel hurt by a seemingly innocent joke, the perpetrator is quick to reframe your response as oversensitivity. "Can't you take a joke?" they'll ask, shifting the blame from their aggressive behavior to your supposedly inappropriate reaction. This gaslighting technique serves a dual purpose. It allows them to continue their attacks while making you doubt your own perceptions. Jung understood that humor, in its shadow form, becomes a socially acceptable way to express unacceptable feelings. The person who consistently makes cutting jokes about your weight, your career choices, or your relationships is revealing their own psychological landscape. They're projecting their shadow onto you, using laughter as a smokescreen for the very real hostility they feel, but cannot consciously acknowledge. The pattern becomes particularly clear when you observe the consistency of their targets. If someone's harmless teasing repeatedly focuses on the same aspects of your life, especially those areas where you've experienced success or personal growth, you're not witnessing spontaneous humor. You're experiencing calculated psychological warfare disguised as social interaction. Recognizing this pattern requires developing an awareness of how these interactions make you feel over time. Genuine humor between friends might occasionally sting, but it's balanced by warmth, mutual respect, and reciprocal teasing that includes self-deprecation. Humor, weaponized by the shadow, however, consistently leaves you feeling diminished, questioned, or attacked, even when you can't quite put your finger on why. The emotional aftermath of these encounters often includes confusion, self-doubt, and a lingering sense of having been violated in some subtle way. Your conscious mind might dismiss the interaction as harmless banter, but your emotional body knows better. Jung encouraged people to trust these deeper knowing, recognizing that our unconscious minds are often more attuned to psychological truth than our rational faculties. The art of subtle sabotage. Moving deeper into the landscape of hidden hostility, we encounter perhaps one of its most sophisticated expressions, the art of subtle sabotage. Unlike the dramatic betrayals we see in movies, real-life sabotage often wears the mask of incompetence, forgetfulness, or simple bad luck. The person engaging in this behavior may not even consciously recognize their own destructive patterns, making it all the more dangerous and difficult to address. Subtle sabotage operates through what appears to be a series of innocent mistakes or oversights that consistently work against your interests. The friend who forgets to tell you about the networking event that could advance your career. The colleague who provides you with incomplete information just before an important presentation. Or the family member who consistently schedules conflicting events during your important moments. These might seem like isolated incidents, but when viewed as a pattern, they reveal a different story. Jung's insights into the unconscious mind help us understand how this process works. People who feel threatened by another's success or potential often experience what psychologists call cognitive dissonance. The uncomfortable tension that arises when their conscious desire to be supportive conflicts with their unconscious feelings of resentment or competition. Rather than confronting these difficult emotions directly, the psyche finds ways to act them out indirectly. The unconscious mind is remarkably creative in finding ways to express forbidden feelings. It might prompt someone to accidentally delete an important email, forget to mention a crucial deadline, or provide advice that sounds helpful but subtly steers you away from opportunities. These actions allow the person to maintain their self-image as supportive while simultaneously undermining your success. What makes this form of hostility particularly challenging to identify is its plausible deniability. When confronted, the saboteur can genuinely claim innocence. They might even feel genuinely surprised and apologetic about their mistake. This isn't necessarily conscious deception. It's the shadow operating below the threshold of awareness, finding creative ways to express the feelings that the conscious mind refuses to acknowledge. The pattern of subtle sabotage often intensifies during periods when you're on the verge of significant breakthroughs or achievements. The unconscious mind of the hostile person seems to sense these crucial moments and responds by increasing the frequency of accidents and oversights. Pay attention to whether someone's helpfulness decreases or their mistakes increase when you're approaching important milestones. Recognizing subtle sabotage requires developing what Jung called amplified attention, the ability to see patterns rather than isolated incidents. One forgotten message might be genuine forgetfulness. A consistent pattern of communication failures that always seem to work against your interests suggests something deeper at play. One piece of bad advice might be an honest mistake. Repeatedly being steered away from opportunities that could benefit you indicates a more systematic undermining. The psychological impact of subtle sabotage extends beyond the immediate practical consequences. Being consistently undermined by someone you trust creates a deep sense of confusion and self-doubt. You begin to question your own judgment, wondering if you're reading too much into innocent mistakes. This gaslighting effect, whether intentional or unconscious, can be more damaging than overt hostility because it erodes your confidence in your own perceptions. Jung emphasized that the shadow's influence becomes stronger when it remains unconscious and unacknowledged. People engaging in subtle sabotage are often acting out their own unresolved feelings of inadequacy, fear, or competitive drive. They may unconsciously believe that diminishing others will somehow elevate themselves, not recognizing that this zero-sum thinking ultimately impoverishes all relationships involved. The endless competition. Human beings are naturally competitive creatures, and healthy competition can drive innovation, excellence, and personal growth. However, when filtered through the lens of hidden hostility, competition transforms from a motivating force into a relentless and exhausting dynamic that poisons relationships and creates an atmosphere of constant tension. This perversion of natural competitive instincts represents one of the most emotionally draining expressions of shadow projection. The person caught in the grip of shadow competition experiences your successes not as occasions for celebration, but as personal threats to their self-worth. Every achievement you share becomes a challenge they must meet or exceed. Every piece of good news you offer becomes an opportunity for them to redirect attention to their own accomplishments. What should be moments of connection and mutual joy transform into battlegrounds where only one person can emerge victorious. This dynamic often manifests in subtle but persistent ways. Share news of a promotion and they immediately launch into a detailed account of their own career advancement. Mention a personal milestone and they somehow manage to top it with their own experience. Express excitement about a new relationship and they find ways to highlight the superiority of their own romantic situation. The pattern becomes so predictable that you begin to dread sharing good news, knowing it will inevitably trigger a competitive response rather than genuine celebration. Jung understood that this compulsive need to compete stems from deep-seated feelings of inadequacy and insecurity. The person engaging in shadow competition isn't actually competing with you. They're fighting an internal battle with their own sense of insufficiency. Your achievements become mirrors that reflect back their own perceived failures, and rather than using this reflection for self-examination and growth, they attempt to shatter the mirror by diminishing or overshadowing your success. The psychological mechanism at work here involves what Jung termed projection of the inferior function. People tend to project their own underdeveloped or struggling aspects onto others, then either idealize or demonize those others as a way of avoiding direct confrontation with their own limitations. In the case of shadow competition, your successes highlight areas where they feel inadequate, triggering an unconscious defensive response designed to restore their psychological equilibrium. This dynamic creates a particularly poisonous atmosphere because it prevents authentic sharing and mutual support. Relationships become performance spaces where every interaction carries the potential for comparison and judgment. The natural human impulse to share joy and seek support from close friends and family members gets twisted into a strategic calculation about whether sharing will trigger competitive retaliation. The person engaging in shadow competition often doesn't recognize their own behavior patterns. They may genuinely believe they're being supportive when they match every story you tell with a bigger, better version of their own. From their perspective, they're contributing to the conversation and sharing in the exchange of experiences. They don't see how their responses consistently diminish your moments rather than amplifying them. Recognizing shadow competition requires paying attention to the emotional aftermath of conversations. Healthy competitive banter between friends might include some back and forth, but it's ultimately energizing and fun for all parties involved. Shadow competition, however, leaves you feeling drained, diminished, or frustrated. You walk away from these interactions feeling like you've been in a contest you never agreed to enter, competing for a prize you never wanted. The timing of competitive responses also reveals important information about underlying motivations. Genuine friends might share their own similar experiences, but they typically do so in ways that complement rather than compete with your news. They might say something like, "That reminds me of when I," and then circle back to celebrate your achievement. Shadow competitors, however, use your news as a launching pad for their own stories, rarely returning focus to your original sharing. The stakes of shadow competition often seem disproportionate to the actual achievements being discussed. Someone might respond to your mention of a small personal victory with an elaborate recounting of their own much larger success, as if your modest accomplishment somehow threatens their standing. This disproportion reveals the emotional charge behind the competition. It's not really about the specific achievements, but about the deeper psychological wounds that your success inadvertently triggers. Support that betrays. Perhaps one of the most painful expressions of hidden hostility is the phenomenon of support that ultimately betrays rather than uplifts. This occurs when someone offers what appears to be help or encouragement, but delivers it in ways that actually undermine your confidence, progress, or well-being. Unlike overt antagonism, which at least has the virtue of clarity, betraying support creates a confusing emotional landscape where you're left questioning both the other person's intentions and your own reactions. This form of shadow expression often manifests in relationships where the hostile person maintains a self-image as helpful, caring, or supportive. They cannot consciously acknowledge their negative feelings, so these emotions find expression through the very behaviors they believe demonstrate their positive intentions. The result is a particularly cruel form of psychological manipulation that operates under the guise of care and concern. The mechanisms of betraying support are varied and sophisticated. It might appear as advice that consistently steers you away from opportunities, encouragement that somehow leaves you feeling less confident than before, or assistance that creates more problems than it solves. The person offering this false support often seems genuinely confused when their help doesn't result in positive outcomes, not recognizing how their unconscious hostility shapes their supposedly helpful actions. One common manifestation involves what could be called diminishing encouragement. The person offers what sounds like support, but consistently includes elements that undermine your confidence. They might say things like, I'm sure you'll do fine, though that kind of thing is usually pretty difficult for people like you. Or, you should definitely try, even though you probably won't succeed. The structure appears supportive. They're encouraging you to pursue your goals, but the content plants seeds of doubt and limitation. Another form involves selective availability. The person positions themselves as your supporter and advisor, but their availability mysteriously disappears during crucial moments when you actually need help. They're full of advice and encouragement during casual conversations, but when you face real challenges or opportunities where their support could make a difference, they become suddenly busy, distracted, or unavailable. This pattern creates a sense of abandonment precisely when you're most vulnerable. Jung's understanding of the shadow helps explain how well-meaning people can engage in such destructive behavior without conscious awareness. The unconscious mind finds ways to act out forbidden feelings, even through behaviors that the conscious mind believes are positive. Someone who unconsciously resents your potential for success might offer support that subtly sabotages your efforts, allowing them to maintain their self-image as helpful while ensuring that you don't actually succeed. The emotional impact of betraying support is particularly devastating because it attacks your ability to trust your own judgment about relationships. When someone consistently offers help that doesn't help, or encouragement that doesn't encourage, you begin to question whether the problem lies with their intentions or with your expectations. This self-doubt can be more damaging than overt hostility because it erodes your confidence in your ability to discern who is truly in your corner. Recognizing betraying support requires developing sensitivity to the gap between stated intentions and actual outcomes. Pay attention to how you feel after receiving someone's help or encouragement. Genuine support leaves you feeling more capable, more confident, and more connected to your own strength and potential. Betraying support, regardless of its stated purpose, consistently leaves you feeling smaller, more doubtful, or more confused about your abilities and options. The pattern often becomes clearer when you observe how the person responds to your actual successes versus your struggles. Someone offering genuine support celebrates your victories and provides comfort during difficulties. Someone offering betraying support might seem more engaged and energetic when you're struggling, perhaps because your difficulties confirm their unconscious expectations or desires, and more distant or critical when you're succeeding. The sophistication of betraying support lies in its ability to operate through seemingly positive behaviors. The person can point to all the times they offered advice, provided encouragement, or attempted to help, making it difficult to identify the destructive pattern. They may even feel genuinely hurt or confused if you question their supportiveness, not recognizing how their unconscious hostility has shaped their supposedly caring actions. Control masquerading as concern. Among the most psychologically complex expressions of hidden hostility is the phenomenon of control disguised as caring concern. This pattern represents a particularly sophisticated form of shadow projection, where the hostile person's need to dominate and diminish others gets expressed through behaviors that appear loving, protective, and helpful on the surface. The result is a form of psychological manipulation that can be extremely difficult to identify and even harder to address, particularly when it occurs within close relationships where care and concern are expected and valued. The person engaging in this behavior often possesses a genuine belief in their own good intentions. They see themselves as protective, wise, and appropriately concerned about your welfare. This self-perception makes them particularly resistant to feedback about their controlling behavior and creates a complex dynamic where questioning their actions can be reframed as ingratitude or lack of appreciation for their care. Control masquerading as concern operates through a systematic undermining of your confidence in your own judgment and decision-making abilities. The controlling person positions themselves as the wise advisor whose guidance is essential for your well-being and success. They consistently question your choices, highlight potential problems with your plans, and subtly, or not so subtly, suggest that their way of thinking or acting would be superior to yours. This pattern often begins with seemingly reasonable expressions of concern. They might point out genuine risks or challenges associated with your goals or decisions. However, over time, their concern reveals itself to be less about protecting you and more about keeping you dependent on their guidance and approval. They seem to have an endless supply of reasons why your ideas won't work, why your goals are unrealistic, or why your current approach needs modification. Jung's insights into power dynamics and psychological dependence illuminate the deeper motivations behind this behavior. People who need to control others often do so because they feel profoundly out of control in their own lives. Rather than facing their own chaos, uncertainty, and emotional instability, they attempt to create a sense of order and predictability by managing the lives of others. Your independence and successful decision-making threaten their sense of being needed and important. The controlling person's concern often intensifies precisely when you're moving toward greater independence, success, or self-confidence. They seem to have a radar for detecting when you're about to make significant positive changes in your life, and their warnings and advice multiply during these crucial periods. This isn't coincidental. Your growth and independence represent threats to their role as your advisor and to their unconscious need to keep you in a dependent position. The language of control masquerading as concern is particularly revealing. It's filled with phrases like, "I'm only trying to help," "I'm worried about you," "I don't think you realize," and "you should really consider." These phrases position the speaker as the knowledgeable protector and you as the naive person who needs guidance. The implied power dynamic places them in a superior position, while casting you as someone who lacks the wisdom or experience to make good decisions independently. One of the most insidious aspects of this pattern is how it gradually erodes your confidence in your own judgment. Constant questioning of your decisions, even when framed as loving concern, creates a psychological environment where you begin to doubt your own capabilities. You start second-guessing yourself, seeking approval for decisions you should be able to make independently, and feeling anxious about acting without their input or blessing. The emotional aftermath of interactions with controlling caregivers often includes feelings of confusion, frustration, and diminishment. Despite their claims of wanting to help, you consistently feel less capable and less confident after receiving their input. This paradox, feeling worse after receiving help, is a key indicator that you're dealing with control rather than genuine care. Genuine concern empowers the recipient to make better decisions and feel more confident in their abilities. It provides information, support, and encouragement while ultimately respecting the person's autonomy and right to make their own choices. Control masquerading as concern, however, consistently undermines autonomy and creates dependency, regardless of its stated intentions. The person engaging in this behavior often becomes frustrated or even angry when their advice isn't followed, or when you make independent decisions that succeed despite their warnings. This reaction reveals the true nature of their concern. It's less about your welfare and more about their need to be right and to maintain their role as your advisor and protector. The poison of whispered criticism. The realm of hidden hostility contains few expressions as destructive and cowardly as the systematic spreading of negative information about someone behind their back. This behavior represents the shadow's preference for indirect attack, allowing the hostile person to damage their target's reputation and relationships while maintaining their own image as innocent or even sympathetic. The sophistication of this form of psychological warfare lies in its ability to isolate and undermine someone without leaving clear fingerprints of responsibility. Unlike face-to-face confrontation, which requires courage and offers the target an opportunity to respond, whispered criticism operates in the shadows of social networks and professional relationships. The person engaging in this behavior carefully selects their audiences, sharing carefully crafted versions of events that cast their target in negative light while positioning themselves as either the victim or the concerned observer, sharing necessary information. The art of whispered criticism involves several sophisticated techniques. The critic might share information that is technically true but presented in misleading ways, emphasize negative aspects while omitting positive context, or combine factual information with subtle interpretations that guide the listener toward negative conclusions. They often preface their comments with phrases like, "I'm not one to gossip, but," or "I'm only telling you this because I'm concerned," creating a veneer of reluctance that makes their criticisms seem more credible and themselves more trustworthy. Jung understood that this behavior serves multiple psychological functions for the person engaging in it. First, it allows them to act out their hostility without taking direct responsibility for their actions. Second, it creates a sense of alliance with the people they're speaking to, positioning themselves as the insider, sharing important information. Third, it provides a temporary boost to their self-esteem by elevating themselves through the diminishment of others. The systematic nature of whispered criticism is particularly revealing. The hostile person doesn't just occasionally share negative information, they consistently find opportunities to cast their target in a poor light across multiple relationships and social contexts. They become skilled at reading their audiences, understanding which criticisms will resonate with which listeners, and timing their revelations for maximum impact. The cumulative effect of this behavior can be devastating for the target. Relationships that once felt secure begin to feel strained for reasons that aren't immediately apparent. Colleagues become more distant, friends seem less available, and social invitations mysteriously decrease. The target often experiences these changes as a vague sense that something has shifted in their social environment, without understanding what has caused the change. One of the most insidious aspects of whispered criticism is how it creates a self-reinforcing cycle. As the target's relationships become strained due to the negative information being spread about them, their changed behavior, perhaps becoming more withdrawn, defensive, or confused, can be interpreted as evidence supporting the original criticisms. The hostile person can then point to these behavioral changes as proof that their concerns were justified. The psychological impact on the target extends beyond the immediate social consequences. Being systematically undermined in this way creates a profound sense of paranoia and isolation. The target begins to question which relationships are genuine and which have been poisoned by misinformation. They may become hypervigilant about their own behavior, constantly wondering whether their actions will be misinterpreted or reported in negative ways. Recognizing that you're the target of whispered criticism requires developing sensitivity to patterns in your social environment. Pay attention to sudden shifts in how people interact with you, especially when these changes seem to occur without any direct interaction that would explain them. Notice whether certain individuals seem to have more information about your personal situation than you've directly shared with them, suggesting that someone has been discussing your affairs behind your back. The content of whispered criticism often reveals the psychological wounds and insecurities of the person spreading it. They tend to focus on areas where they themselves feel vulnerable or inadequate, projecting their own shadows onto their target. Someone who spreads rumors about another person's professional competence may be struggling with their own career insecurities. Someone who gossips about another's relationships may be dealing with their own romantic disappointments. The cowardly nature of this behavior becomes particularly apparent when the hostile person is confronted directly about their actions. They typically deny responsibility, claim to have been misunderstood, or shift blame to others who misinterpreted their innocent sharing of information. They rarely take direct responsibility for the damage their words have caused, instead positioning themselves as the victims of misunderstanding or overreaction. The absence of genuine joy. Perhaps one of the most heartbreaking expressions of hidden hostility is the consistent inability of certain people to genuinely celebrate the successes and happiness of others. This pattern reveals itself not through dramatic displays of jealousy or resentment, but through the subtle absence of authentic joy, the forced quality of congratulations, and the persistent need to redirect attention away from others' achievements toward their own experiences or concerns. Genuine joy in another's success is one of the fundamental building blocks of healthy relationships. It represents an expansion of the heart, an ability to experience vicarious happiness, and a recognition that another person's good fortune doesn't diminish our own potential for happiness. When this capacity for shared joy is absent or corrupted by hidden hostility, relationships become transactional spaces where every interaction is measured against personal gain or loss rather than mutual celebration and support. The person struggling with hidden hostility experiences others' successes as personal threats rather than occasions for celebration. This reaction stems from a deep-seated belief in scarcity, the unconscious conviction that there's only a limited amount of success, happiness, or recognition available in the world, and that another person's achievements somehow reduce their own opportunities. This zero-sum thinking transforms what should be moments of connection and shared happiness into competitions where only one person can truly win. The absence of genuine joy manifests in numerous subtle ways. The hostile person's congratulations sound hollow and forced, delivered with the same enthusiasm one might use to comment on the weather. Their facial expressions don't match their words. They might say, "Congratulations," while their eyes remain cold, or their smile appears strained and unnatural. They have a remarkable talent for changing the subject quickly after acknowledging your achievement, as if spending too much time on your success causes them physical discomfort. Jung's understanding of emotional projection helps explain this phenomenon. People who cannot access genuine joy for others are often struggling with profound disappointments and unfulfilled longings in their own lives. Your success becomes a mirror that reflects their own sense of failure or inadequacy, triggering defensive reactions designed to protect their fragile self-esteem. Rather than using your achievement as inspiration or motivation, they experience it as judgment or condemnation of their own choices and outcomes. The timing of their reactions often reveals the depth of their hostility. The more significant your achievement, the more pronounced their inability to celebrate becomes. Small successes might elicit perfunctory acknowledgement, but major milestones, promotions, awards, relationship milestones, or personal breakthroughs seem to trigger almost visible discomfort. They might become suddenly busy, change the subject abruptly, or find ways to minimize the importance of your achievement. Their language choices also provide important clues about their underlying feelings. Instead of expressing unqualified happiness for your success, they tend to use phrases that subtly diminish or qualify your achievement. They might say things like, "Well, that's nice, I guess," or "Good for you, though I'm not sure I'd want that kind of pressure," or "Congratulations, though you know that kind of thing isn't really that important in the long run." These responses manage to acknowledge your success while simultaneously undermining its value or desirability. The absence of genuine joy becomes particularly apparent when contrasted with how the same person responds to others' difficulties or failures. While they struggle to celebrate your successes, they may show much more authentic engagement and energy when discussing your problems or setbacks. This disparity reveals the true emotional landscape. They're more comfortable with your struggles than with your triumphs because your difficulties don't trigger their own feelings of inadequacy or competitive threat. The psychological mechanism behind this pattern involves what Jung called shadow compensation. The hostile person's inability to achieve their own desired level of success creates a shadow complex that seeks balance through the diminishment of others. Since they cannot elevate themselves to the level they desire, their unconscious mind finds relief in preventing others from rising too far above them. Your success disrupts this psychological equilibrium, triggering defensive reactions designed to restore their sense of relative position. The impact of this pattern on relationships can be profound and lasting. When someone consistently fails to celebrate your achievements, it creates a sense of emotional isolation during what should be your happiest moments. You begin to edit your sharing, downplaying your successes, or avoiding mentioning them altogether to prevent the awkward interactions that follow. This self-censorship impoverishes the relationship and prevents the natural bonding that occurs when people genuinely share in each other's joys. The absence of genuine joy also creates a toxic emotional environment where achievement becomes associated with isolation rather than connection. Instead of success bringing you closer to the people in your life, it becomes something that creates distance and tension. This association can unconsciously discourage you from pursuing your goals or fully embracing your achievements, as part of your psyche learns that success means losing emotional support from important relationships. The silent language of the body. The most sophisticated and revealing aspect of hidden hostility lies not in words or conscious actions, but in the realm of nonverbal communication. The involuntary signals, micro-expressions, and physical responses that bypass conscious control and reveal the true emotional landscape beneath carefully constructed facades. Jung understood that the body serves as a direct conduit to the unconscious mind, expressing truths that the conscious mind works desperately to conceal. The human body possesses its own intelligence, one that operates independently of our rational thoughts and social conditioning. This intelligence responds to emotional reality rather than social expectation, revealing through gesture, posture, facial expression, and subtle physical responses what words attempt to hide. When someone harbors hidden hostility while maintaining a surface appearance of friendship or support, their body inevitably betrays the deception through signals that trained observers can learn to recognize. Micro-expressions represent perhaps the most revealing form of non-verbal leakage. These fleeting facial expressions, lasting sometimes only fractions of a second, occur before conscious control can suppress them. The person with hidden hostility might flash a genuine smile when sharing your setback, despite their verbal expressions of sympathy. They might show a brief expression of annoyance or disgust when you mention a success, quickly covered by a forced smile and appropriate words of congratulation. The eyes, often called windows to the soul, provide particularly rich information about authentic emotional states. Despite cultural training that teaches us to make appropriate eye contact and appear engaged, the quality of someone's gaze reveals volumes about their true feelings. The hostile person's eyes might become cold or hard when you speak about your achievements, even while their mouth forms words of support. They might avoid eye contact altogether during moments when genuine friends would naturally seek connection, or their gaze might become calculating rather than warm during conversations about your plans and dreams. Physical tension provides another reliable indicator of hidden emotional states. The person struggling with concealed hostility often experiences involuntary physical responses during interactions that trigger their shadow emotions. Their shoulders might tense when you share good news, their jaw might tighten during conversations about your success, or their hands might clench while they offer verbal congratulations. These physical responses occur because the body prepares for conflict even when the conscious mind insists on maintaining social pleasantries. Spatial behavior, how someone positions themselves physically in relation to you, also reveals important information about underlying feelings. The hostile person might unconsciously create more physical distance during conversations about your achievements, step back when you express enthusiasm, or orient their body away from you while maintaining verbal engagement. These subtle movements reflect an unconscious desire to escape or defend against the emotional discomfort your presence or success creates for them. Jung emphasized that these nonverbal signals emerge from what he called the autonomous complex, psychological patterns that operate independently of conscious control. When someone experiences strong emotions that conflict with their self-image or social role, these emotions find expression through the body's autonomous responses. The person cannot consciously control these signals because they emerge from psychological depths that lie beyond rational management. The voice itself becomes an instrument of unconscious expression, revealing emotional truths through tone, rhythm, and inflection that contradict the content of speech. The hostile person's voice might become slightly flat or mechanical when offering congratulations, lacking the natural warmth and variation that accompanies genuine emotion. They might speak more quickly when discussing your achievements, as if eager to move past the uncomfortable topic, or their voice might carry subtle notes of strain or tension despite their attempts to sound supportive. Breathing patterns also provide valuable information about authentic emotional states. The person experiencing hidden hostility might unconsciously hold their breath or breathe more shallowly during conversations that trigger their shadow emotions. These changes occur because strong emotions affect the autonomic nervous system, altering basic physiological functions in ways that reflect internal psychological states. The timing of nonverbal responses often proves more revealing than their content. The hostile person might pause too long before offering congratulations, as if needing time to manufacture an appropriate response. Their facial expressions might lag behind their words, creating a disconnect between verbal and nonverbal communication that signals internal conflict. They might smile at inappropriate moments or maintain expressions that don't match the content of their speech. Perhaps most revealing is the overall quality of presence that someone brings to interactions. Genuine care and friendship create a certain energetic quality, warmth, openness, and authentic engagement that can be felt even when not explicitly observed. Hidden hostility, however, creates a different energetic signature, one characterized by tension, guardedness, and subtle withdrawal even in the midst of seemingly friendly interaction. The unconscious mind possesses remarkable sensitivity to these nonverbal signals, often detecting hostility long before the conscious mind can articulate why something feels off about a particular relationship. Learning to trust these deeper perceptions while developing conscious awareness of nonverbal patterns provides powerful protection against psychological manipulation and emotional harm. Understanding the patterns of hidden hostility serves not to create paranoia or cynicism about human relationships, but to develop the wisdom necessary for navigating the complex landscape of human emotions with greater clarity and self-protection. Jung believed that consciousness itself was the antidote to shadow projection, that bringing unconscious patterns into the light of awareness diminished their power to operate destructively in our lives. The recognition that someone harbors hidden hostility toward you can be initially destabilizing, particularly when that person plays an important role in your personal or professional life. The natural impulse might be to confront them directly, to demand acknowledgement of their true feelings, or to cut them out of your life entirely. However, wisdom suggests a more nuanced approach that considers both the complexity of human psychology and the practical realities of maintaining necessary relationships. First, it's essential to recognize that most people engaging in shadow projection are not consciously aware of their own hostility. They may genuinely believe their own stated intentions while remaining blind to the destructive patterns in their behavior. Direct confrontation often triggers defensive reactions that can escalate conflict without producing positive change. Instead, awareness allows you to adjust your expectations and interactions in ways that protect your emotional well-being while maintaining necessary relationships. If you want to build self-discipline, you'd do well to listen to the words of Marcus Aurelius. He was the Emperor of Rome from 161 to 180 AD, and is considered the last of the 5 good emperors. During his rule, Aurelius found the time to construct a series of autobiographical writings, now known as the Meditations. In these writings, the Roman emperor offered several key insights on how to build self-discipline. These insights remain profoundly relevant in our modern world, where distractions abound and self-mastery seems increasingly difficult to achieve. Marcus Aurelius didn't write the Meditations for publication. Rather, they were personal notes to himself, reflections on how to live virtuously and maintain inner strength amidst the chaos of ruling an empire. This private nature makes his words all the more powerful. They represent his genuine struggle to live according to Stoic principles while facing enormous responsibilities and challenges. His quest for self-improvement wasn't theoretical. It was practical and urgent. The beauty of Aurelius's philosophy lies in its accessibility. Though he was an emperor with unimaginable power and wealth, his struggles were fundamentally human, managing emotions, staying focused on important tasks, avoiding distraction, and maintaining perspective when faced with adversity. His insights on self-discipline aren't abstract philosophical concepts, but practical tools anyone can apply to their daily lives. In the pages that follow, we'll explore the wisdom of Marcus Aurelius on self-discipline, examining how his ancient advice can transform our modern lives. His teachings offer a timeless blueprint for developing the inner strength required to pursue our goals with unwavering commitment, regardless of obstacles or setbacks. Through the lens of his philosophical insights, we can discover powerful methods to cultivate the self-discipline necessary to create meaningful change in our lives and achieve our deepest aspirations. Self-discipline starts with finding your purpose. Marcus Aurelius says, "I have to go to work as a human being. What do I have to complain about if I'm going to do what I was born for, the things I was brought into the world to do? Or is this what I was created for, to huddle under the blankets and stay warm?" Marcus Aurelius believed that we each have a purpose, something that we were created for. It is our duty to carry out that purpose, because it is the purpose that gets you out of bed each morning. If you have a clear understanding of your goals and how your task fits within them, you are much more likely to complete it. Consider how this plays out in everyday life. Say you have a flat tire and need to change it. Your purpose is clear: change the tire as quickly as possible so you can get on your way. You are going to do that task no matter how tired you feel. The need is immediate and the purpose obvious. But what about the more complex areas of life? How do we find purpose in our careers, relationships, or personal development? This is where Aurelius' wisdom becomes particularly valuable. He suggests that purpose isn't just about grand missions or lofty ambitions. Purpose can be found in fulfilling our natural human duties, to be rational, to contribute to society, to help others, and to improve ourselves daily. The biggest source of self-discipline is to have a reason to do the task. Without a compelling why, our resolve quickly crumbles when faced with challenges or distractions. Think about the most disciplined people you know. Athletes, entrepreneurs, artists, parents, all are driven by purpose. The athlete endures punishing training because winning matters. The entrepreneur works long hours because building something meaningful drives them. The artist practices endlessly because creating beauty is their passion. The parent sacrifices personal comfort for the well-being of their child. Aurelius understood that purpose creates internal motivation that far outweighs external rewards. When we connect our daily actions to our deeper values and aspirations, discipline becomes less about forcing ourselves to do things and more about aligning with our authentic desires. If you don't know what to do, just start. If you want to be a writer, write every day. If you want to be an artist, draw and create every day. Anything you want to do, you don't need any more motivation or research or advice. You just start practicing something you're interested in and tackle every day as it comes, because it is your purpose that will give you an internal desire, drive, and motivation that propels you forward toward your goal. Finding your purpose doesn't necessarily happen in a single moment of revelation. For most people, it emerges gradually through action and reflection. Aurelius himself wrote extensively about duty and purpose throughout different periods of his life, indicating that his understanding evolved over time. He recognized that purpose isn't something we discover once and forever, but something we continually clarify through living deliberately. In modern times, many people suffer from what philosophers call existential boredom, a sense of meaninglessness that saps motivation and makes self-discipline nearly impossible. Aurelius would prescribe action as the antidote. By engaging fully with life, by testing our capabilities, by serving others, we gradually uncover what resonates most deeply with us. Purpose doesn't always precede action. Often, it emerges from it. Self-discipline is about finding compelling reasons to do something, then committing yourself to see that task or activity through to the very end. When your actions align with your purpose, discipline becomes less a matter of willpower and more a natural expression of your deepest values. Count on yourself. According to Marcus Aurelius, you should turn your desire to stone, quench your appetites, keep your mind centered on itself. After you have a solid purpose, it's time to build a practical plan of action to help you accomplish your goal. You shouldn't just commit to your goals, but commit to all the little actions you will take along the way in the pursuit of those goals. We must be fully committed to doing whatever it takes to get the job done, no matter what challenges get in the way. Self-discipline is the ability to get yourself to take action, to do what you need to do, regardless of your physical, mental, or emotional state. Everything you want in your life, everything you want to have, be, and do, depends on your ability to get yourself to take the necessary actions to achieve your goals, whether you feel like it or not. This idea of relying on yourself runs deep in Stoic philosophy. The Stoics understood that the only thing truly under our control is our mind, our judgments, decisions, and actions. External events, other people's behaviors, and even outcomes are ultimately beyond our complete control. Therefore, Aurelius would advise that true self-discipline means developing an internal locus of control. When Aurelius writes about turning desire to stone and quenching appetites, he's not advocating for joyless asceticism. Rather, he's highlighting the importance of emotional self-regulation. Modern neuroscience confirms what the Stoics intuited. Our emotional impulses, if unchecked, can hijack our rational thinking and derail our best intentions. By learning to observe our desires without immediately acting on them, we create space for reasoned choice rather than impulsive reaction. You can start by forming an effective plan of action that is comprised of a deadline for accomplishing your goal. It must also be built on the foundation of mini milestones that break your goal down into manageable chunks. Mini milestones will ensure that you're working toward your desired outcome in small pieces and time blocks. This tactic puts you in the driver's seat. It gives you a sense of control over the tasks and projects you're working on. The psychological benefit of this approach cannot be overstated. Research in behavioral psychology suggests that we experience a greater sense of progress and motivation when we can see ourselves completing discrete tasks. Each mini milestone achieved triggers the brain's reward pathways, giving us the emotional fuel to continue pushing forward. By breaking down larger goals into smaller components, we also minimize the anxiety that often accompanies ambitious undertakings. What you're ultimately trying to avoid is succumbing to being overwhelmed. Overwhelming can quickly digress to procrastination, and procrastination can subsequently lead to stagnation. And of course, where there is stagnation, self-discipline cannot exist. Aurelius understood the paradox that true independence comes from recognizing our interdependence with others while still taking full responsibility for our own choices. As emperor, he couldn't control every aspect of the vast Roman Empire, but he could control his response to events, his dedication to duty, and his daily habits of thought and action. Counting on yourself means developing what psychologists today call self-efficacy. The belief in your ability to accomplish tasks and reach goals. People with high self-efficacy view challenging problems as tasks to be mastered rather than threats to be avoided. They recover quickly from setbacks and disappointments. They approach threatening situations with the confidence that they can exert control over them. In practice, counting on yourself might look like setting non-negotiable standards for your daily behaviors, regardless of external circumstances. It might mean developing morning routines that prime you for productivity before the day's distractions begin. It might involve creating accountability systems where you report to yourself rather than requiring external supervision. Ultimately, Aurelius would say that true self-discipline comes from within. External motivators, praise, rewards, fear of punishment might work temporarily, but lasting discipline emerges from a deep commitment to your standards of excellence and a willingness to hold yourself accountable even when no one else is watching. Show up every day. Marcus Aurelius says, "You must build up your life action by action and be content if each one achieves its goal as far as possible, and no one can keep you from this." Even after having a solid purpose and a practical plan, many of us fail to achieve our goals. We fail because we fail to be consistent. We need to show up every day and put in the work. The simple act of showing up and immersing yourself in your craft does wonders for mental endurance. This principle of daily consistency was fundamental to Stoic practice. While we might imagine that great achievements require moments of extraordinary effort, Aurelius understood that lasting excellence comes from ordinary actions performed with extraordinary consistency. His meditations were not written in a single burst of inspiration, but composed gradually over many years, with entries added during military campaigns and periods of civil administration. The power of showing up daily lies in the compound effect of consistent effort. Small improvements, barely noticeable in isolation, accumulate into substantial progress over time. Consider the mathematician who solves just one problem each day, or the writer who produces just 300 words daily. Neither might feel they've accomplished much in a single session, but after a year, the mathematician has solved hundreds of problems, and the writer has completed a book-length manuscript. You build focus and come to terms with the arduous process that it takes to achieve anything great. You have to put in countless hours of work before you reap any of the benefits. Self-discipline is nothing but the habit of consistency, finding the motivation to do something again and again until you do it on autopilot and start seeing results. Modern behavioral science confirms the wisdom of Aurelius's approach. Research on habit formation suggests that consistency matters more than intensity when building new behaviors. A moderate workout performed regularly yields better results than occasional intensive training sessions. Daily language practice of 15 minutes surpasses weekly cram sessions of several hours. The neural pathways that support our habits strengthen through repeated activation, making consistent behaviors increasingly automatic and requiring less conscious effort over time. Showing up daily also builds psychological resilience. When you commit to a daily practice, you inevitably face days when you don't feel motivated, when circumstances are challenging, or when results seem disappointing. By pushing through these difficult periods, rather than waiting for optimal conditions, you develop what psychologists call grit, the capacity to maintain effort and interest over the years despite failure, adversity, and plateaus in progress. So even if you fail once, for example, if you didn't exercise when you knew you should have, this doesn't define your character. Your ability to keep going is what molds you into a disciplined and strong person. A bad day doesn't have to become a bad week. A bad week doesn't have to become a bad year. The moment you wake up, remember that the new day is a new life, and move forward by opening your eyes and focusing on what's in front of you, which is life itself. This perspective aligns perfectly with Aurelius's view that life unfolds moment by moment, and that each moment presents a fresh opportunity to act virtuously and purposefully. His famous advice to think of yourself as dead was not morbid, but liberating. It meant letting go of yesterday's failures and tomorrow's anxieties to focus completely on the present moment and its immediate demands. The habit of showing up daily creates a powerful identity shift over time. What begins as, "I'm trying to write every day," gradually transforms into, "I am a writer." This integration of behavior into identity creates intrinsic motivation that sustains effort when external rewards are distant or uncertain. As Aurelius might put it, you're no longer forcing yourself to perform a duty, you're simply expressing your nature. Practice voluntary hardship. In the words of Marcus Aurelius, we should discipline ourselves in small things, and from there progress to things of greater value. If you have a headache, practice not cursing. Don't curse every time you have an earache. And I'm not saying that you can't complain, only don't complain with your whole being. Voluntary hardship is one of the ways we can build our self-discipline. Voluntary hardship means constantly testing ourselves, and by making life routinely uncomfortable in some way, we are hardening ourselves for the day we may need to live it for real. This practice of intentional discomfort, called ascesis by the ancient Stoics, serves multiple purposes in developing self-discipline. First, it demonstrates to us the difference between genuine hardship and mere inconvenience. Many of what problems we consider in modern life are just discomforts that our ancestors would have considered luxurious concerns. By voluntarily experiencing discomfort, we calibrate our perception of difficulty. Second, voluntary hardship builds confidence in our ability to endure challenges. Each time we willingly embrace discomfort and survive it, we gather evidence that we are more resilient than we might have believed. This evidence accumulates into a powerful belief in our capacity to handle future difficulties, whether chosen or unchosen. Third, practicing voluntary hardship teaches impulse control. Modern life is designed for immediate gratification, hungry. Food delivery apps bring meals to your door in minutes. Bored, endless entertainment sits in your pocket. By intentionally delaying or denying ourselves these conveniences, we strengthen our ability to resist impulses and make choices based on values rather than momentary desires. A voluntary hardship might be skipping a meal and going hungry for a night, having a cold shower, not smoking, sleeping on the floor, leaving your jacket at home when you know it's cold and raining out, or donating half of your clothes to charity. You could choose to go without social media for a few days, or throw your smartphone in the drawer. These practices might seem arbitrary or pointless, but their value lies in the mental training they provide. By choosing discomfort in controlled circumstances, we build psychological muscles that serve us when discomfort is thrust upon us. The person who regularly takes cold showers by choice will likely handle a broken water heater with greater equanimity than someone accustomed only to comfort. Seneca, another Stoic philosopher whom Aurelius certainly read and admired, recommended periodic practices of voluntary poverty, dressing in simple clothes, eating plain food, and sleeping on a hard bed. The purpose wasn't self-punishment but preparation. As Seneca wrote, "Set aside a certain number of days during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, with coarse and rough dress, saying to yourself the while, 'Is this the condition that I feared?'" Modern research supports the value of this practice. Studies on hormesis, the beneficial effects of low-dose stressors, suggest that controlled exposure to challenges like cold, heat, hunger, or physical exertion triggers adaptive responses that strengthen our systems. What doesn't kill us makes us stronger, provided the stressor is moderate and we have recovery time. The key is progression. As Aurelius suggests, we discipline ourselves in small things first, then gradually move to greater challenges. Someone unaccustomed to physical discomfort might begin with a 30-second cold shower, not a polar plunge. Someone new to fasting might skip a single meal before attempting a longer fast. This gradual approach builds capacity without overwhelming our systems. Do it often enough, and you will begin to understand what scarcity and hardship feel like, and that you can live with both if needed. This realization is profoundly liberating. Many of our fears revolve around losing comforts or conveniences. By voluntarily experiencing life without them, we discover that our well-being depends far less on external circumstances than we imagined. This isn't to glorify suffering or suggest that genuine hardship is always beneficial. Rather, It's to recognize that controlled voluntary discomfort builds the mental resilience we need to handle life's inevitable challenges with grace and fortitude. Practice dichotomy of control. Marcus Aurelius says, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Being distressed, being bothered by small things instantly is terrible for discipline. You have a goal, you're working, and then thoughts and distress about something external, meaning it's out of your control derails you. The best thing you can do in these circumstances is to apply Epictetus's dichotomy of control. This principle, distinguishing between what we can control and what we cannot, forms the foundation of Stoic practice and is essential for developing genuine self-discipline. Without this distinction, we waste enormous energy trying to control the uncontrollable, leading to frustration, anxiety, and eventually abandonment of our goals. The dichotomy of control can be stated simply. Some things are within our power and others are not. Within our power are our judgments, impulses, desires, aversions, in short, our actions. Not within our power are the body, property, reputation, office, in short, whatever is not our action. When we misapply our control, trying to manage outcomes rather than inputs, we set ourselves up for distress. Consider the writer who becomes fixated on bestseller lists rather than the quality of their writing, or the athlete obsessed with winning rather than performing at their best. Both have attached their sense of success to factors they cannot fully control, creating unnecessary anxiety that undermines their discipline. Reinforce to yourself what is within your control and what is out of your control. If you embrace what's out of your control and accept it, you will experience tranquility. Refer to the following wording next time you're distressed and distracted. Do you have a problem in your life? No? Then don't worry. Yes? Can you do something about it? Yes? Then don't worry. No? Then don't worry. This approach might seem simplistic, but its power lies in redirecting our attention from rumination to action. Worry, by definition, is mental energy spent on matters either beyond our control or within our control but not being addressed. Either way, worry itself accomplishes nothing except depleting our mental resources. The dichotomy of control applies directly to self-discipline in several ways. First, it clarifies where our efforts should be directed. Many people fail at self-discipline because they focus on controlling results rather than behaviors. They want to lose weight, an outcome influenced by many factors, including genetics, rather than focusing on eating nutritious foods and exercising regularly, behaviors entirely within their control. Second, this principle helps us maintain equanimity when facing setbacks. If you've focused your effort on what you can control, your preparation, your attitude, your responses, then outcome-related failures become learning opportunities rather than devastating blows to your self-concept. This resilience is crucial for sustained discipline over time. Third, the dichotomy of control frees us from the emotional roller coaster of external validation. When our sense of success depends on others' reactions or recognition, we become vulnerable to discouragement when that validation doesn't come. By focusing on the quality of our efforts rather than external reception, we maintain consistent motivation regardless of outside response. In practice, applying the dichotomy of control might look like a job seeker focusing on writing excellent applications and preparing thoroughly for interviews rather than obsessing over whether they'll get hired. It might look like a parent concentrating on providing consistent guidance and support rather than controlling their child's every decision. It might look like an entrepreneur dedicating themselves to creating value for customers rather than fixating on competitors' actions. This principle doesn't mean ignoring external circumstances. Rather, it means recognizing which aspects of those circumstances we can influence through our actions and which we must simply accept. Aurelius himself was not a passive observer of life, but an active participant who worked tirelessly to improve conditions within the Roman Empire. Yet he maintained his inner peace by focusing on his conduct rather than factors beyond his sphere of influence. The dichotomy of control provides a powerful framework for allocating our limited mental and emotional resources. By investing our energy exclusively in what we can control, our judgments and actions, we maximize our effectiveness while minimizing unnecessary distress. This focused approach is essential for maintaining the sustained effort that self-discipline requires. Never play the victim. In the words of Marcus Aurelius, do your job without whining. Have you said any of these? I was just born this way. I never learned anything different. My parents set a terrible example. Everyone else does it. What are these? Excuses that people use to justify staying as they are instead of striving to become better. Victim mentality represents one of the greatest obstacles to self-discipline. When we cast ourselves as helpless subjects of circumstance, we surrender our agency, the very agency required to make difficult choices and sustain challenging efforts. Aurelius, who faced tremendous adversity throughout his reign, including plague, war, and betrayal, understood that complaining changes nothing except our attitude toward the work that must be done. You need to assume responsibility. The why me mentality is an enemy to mental toughness. You might not be at fault, but your life depends on you determining what's within your control and taking those things into your own hands. You must train yourself to frame these things this way, instead of immediately resorting to self-pity. This doesn't mean denying genuine harm or trauma. Aurelius wasn't suggesting that real suffering doesn't exist or matter. Rather, he recognized that dwelling on injustice or misfortune, especially when nothing can be done to change the past, keeps us trapped in unproductive emotional states that prevent forward movement. The Stoic approach to hardship involves acknowledging reality without being defined by it. Yes, you may have had difficult parents. Yes, you may have faced discrimination. Yes, you may have experienced setbacks that others haven't. All of these things can be true, and yet the question remains, what will you do now with the circumstances you have? It's certainly easier to pawn off blame on others when something goes wrong, but only those with a degree of mental fortitude can step up, even when it's not their fault, and right the ship. Be that person who steps in to take action, not the one who looks the other way and casts blame. Research in psychology supports this perspective. Studies on what psychologists call an internal locus of control, the belief that you influence your outcomes, show that people with this mindset demonstrate greater resilience, better academic performance, lower rates of depression, and more effective stress management. Those with an external locus of control, who believe their lives are primarily determined by outside forces, show the opposite pattern. Taking responsibility doesn't mean taking the blame. It means recognizing your responsibility, your capacity to respond to situations rather than merely react to them. This distinction is crucial for developing self-discipline. When you see yourself as an agent rather than an object, you approach challenges with resourcefulness rather than resentment. Consider how this plays out in practical scenarios. A person with a victim mentality might say, "I can't exercise because my schedule is too busy," implying their time is controlled entirely by external forces. Someone taking responsibility might say, "I haven't made exercise a priority given my current schedule constraints," acknowledging their role in allocating their time. When you victimize yourself or your current position, you relinquish control and absolve yourself of personal responsibility. And without a sense of ownership, meaningful progress becomes an impossible task. Aurelius would argue that this relinquishment of control is a choice itself, perhaps the most consequential choice we make. Even in circumstances where our options seem severely limited, we retain what Viktor Frankl, who endured Nazi concentration camps, called the last of human freedoms, the ability to choose our attitude toward our situation. This freedom forms the foundation for all other expressions of self-discipline. Without it, external constraints become internal prisons. Practicing responsibility might begin with language. Notice when you use passive constructions, "this happened to me," versus active ones, "I responded to this." Pay attention to how often you attribute outcomes to luck, fate, or others' actions rather than your own choices. Simply shifting your language can begin to shift your perspective. The ultimate expression of responsibility isn't self-blame, but self-empowerment. It's recognizing that while you didn't create all of your circumstances, you have the power to create your response to them. This recognition doesn't guarantee success, but it establishes the preconditions necessary for meaningful progress and genuine self-discipline. Practice delayed gratification. In the words of Marcus Aurelius, "So you were born to feel nice, instead of doing things and experiencing them. Don't you see the plants, the birds, the ants and spiders, and bees going about their tasks, putting the world in order as best they can? And you're not willing to do your job as a human being. Why aren't you running to do what your nature demands?" Delayed gratification involves the ability to wait to get what you want. Imagine a company Christmas party where you encounter platters of delicious and tempting foods when you are trying to lose weight. If you give in and fill up your plate with fattening goodies, it might derail your diet, but you will get to enjoy a bit of instant gratification. If you manage to resist and spend the evening eating salad and munching on carrot sticks, then you will presumably receive an even greater reward down the line, shedding those unwanted pounds and being able to fit into your favorite pair of skinny jeans. This ability to resist temptation and stick to our goals is often referred to as self-discipline, and delaying gratification is often seen as a central part of this behavior. We put off what we want now so that we can perhaps get something else, something better later on. Aurelius's stern questioning about being born to feel nice cuts to the heart of our modern obsession with comfort and immediate pleasure. In a world where entertainment, food, and various forms of stimulation are available at the touch of a button, his words challenge us to examine our assumptions about what constitutes a good life. Is constant pleasure our purpose? Or might there be deeper satisfactions in pursuing challenging but meaningful endeavors? The famous Stanford marshmallow experiments of the 1970s highlighted the importance of delayed gratification for life success. Children who could resist eating a single marshmallow for 15 minutes to receive 2 marshmallows later showed better life outcomes years later. Higher SAT scores, better educational achievements, healthier body mass index, and greater life satisfaction. while later research has qualified these findings, considering factors like socioeconomic status and trust. The basic principle holds. The capacity to delay gratification correlates strongly with positive life outcomes. From a neurological perspective, delayed gratification represents a victory of the prefrontal cortex, responsible for planning and decision-making, over the limbic system, which drives immediate reward-seeking. This mental muscle grows stronger with exercise, just as Aurelius would have predicted. Each time we choose long-term benefit over immediate pleasure, we strengthen neural pathways that make future acts of self-discipline easier. Stoic philosophy offered specific practices for developing this capacity. Negative visualization involves imagining losing things we value, not to induce anxiety, but to reduce our attachment to comforts and pleasures. Periodic abstinence from enjoyable activities helped break their hold over us. Regular reflection on mortality, memento mori, provided perspective that made short-term sacrifices seem less significant. In our modern context, practicing delayed gratification might involve setting clear long-term goals that motivate short-term sacrifices. When temptation strikes, having a compelling vision of your future self helps you resist immediate impulses. Creating environmental constraints that make impulsive choices more difficult. This might mean keeping tempting foods out of the house, using apps that block distracting websites during work hours, or leaving credit cards at home when shopping. Developing mindfulness about impulses without immediately acting on them. The Stoic practice of stepping back from initial impressions applies perfectly here, learning to observe cravings without identifying with them. Celebrating process goals rather than just outcome goals. Instead of rewarding yourself only when you reach your target weight, for instance, acknowledge each week of consistent, healthy eating. Aurelius would likely agree with modern psychologists who distinguish between delay of gratification and denial of pleasure. Stoicism isn't about asceticism for its own sake, but about choosing greater goods over lesser ones. Sometimes the greater good involves immediate action and enjoyment. Other times it requires patience and restraint. Wisdom lies in knowing the difference. The capacity for delayed gratification doesn't just help us achieve specific goals, it fundamentally changes our relationship with time. Rather than being trapped in an endless series of present moments, each demanding immediate satisfaction, we develop what psychologists call temporal self-continuity, the sense that our present and future selves are connected. This expanded time horizon allows for more meaningful life projects and deeper satisfactions than moment-to-moment pleasure-seeking can provide. Ignore naysayers. Marcus Aurelius says, when another blames you or hates you, or people voice similar criticisms, go to their souls, penetrate inside, and see what sort of people they are. You will realize that there is no need to be racked with anxiety that they should hold any particular opinion about you. Whenever you step out from the norm and declare, even if only to yourself, that you believe that you have a special purpose in life and that you are going to do whatever it takes to achieve it, you will attract naysayers. Naysayers are the people who criticize, object to, or oppose something. The naysayers just love to say, nay. They might love you, but they are afraid of progress, so they are against everything, and their opinions are just terrible for your self-discipline. Aurelius understood a profound psychological truth. Most criticism says more about the critic than the criticized. When someone responds negatively to our aspirations or efforts, they often project their fears, limitations, or regrets. The person who insists you'll never make it as an entrepreneur may be speaking from their own failed attempt or their fear of taking risks. Understanding this doesn't make criticism less painful in the moment, but it helps us evaluate whether we should take it seriously. You need to realize that allowing yourself to be upset by the opinion of someone you don't know or don't respect is as foolish as getting upset about the weather. It's a waste of energy. Their voice does not deserve to be heard. Don't hand over your peace of mind to outsiders to disrupt as they please. This advice doesn't suggest ignoring all feedback. Rather, Aurelius advocates developing discernment about whose opinions matter. As he writes elsewhere in Meditations, don't waste the rest of your time here worrying about other people, unless it affects the common good. It will keep you from doing anything useful. The key distinction is between constructive criticism from knowledgeable sources who wish you well versus reactive negativity from those threatened by your growth or change. The phenomenon of naysaying has deep evolutionary roots. Humans evolved in small groups where conformity offered safety and rejection meant possible death. Our brains are wired to care deeply about social approval, making criticism particularly painful. Understanding this natural sensitivity can help us recognize when our reaction to criticism is disproportionate to its actual importance. Innovation and achievement throughout history have faced initial skepticism. The Wright brothers were ridiculed before their first successful flight. Einstein's theories were dismissed by many physicists of his time. J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter manuscript was rejected by numerous publishers. Had these individuals allowed naysayers to derail their efforts, the world would be poorer for it. You should actively seek honest feedback from those you respect. But if someone just has a history of being a naysayer, ignore them. This selective attention requires self-awareness about your tendencies. Some of us are too dismissive of criticism, missing valuable information that could improve our efforts. Others are hypersensitive, allowing any negative comment to trigger self-doubt. The disciplined approach lies between these extremes, listening carefully to credible sources while filtering out noise from those without relevant expertise or genuine concern for your well-being. Practically speaking, ignoring naysayers might involve limiting exposure to environments where unconstructive criticism flourishes, such as certain social media platforms or negative social circles. Developing personal mantras or reflections that help maintain perspective when criticism stings, such as, "This is their fear speaking, not my reality." Creating support systems of like-minded individuals pursuing similar goals who understand your challenges and aspirations. Documenting your progress to remind yourself of how far you've come when doubts arise. When criticism does penetrate your defenses, as it inevitably will sometimes, Aurelius would advise examining it dispassionately rather than reactively. Is there a kernel of truth that could help you improve? If so, extract that value while discarding the emotional charge that accompanied it. If not, release it without allowing it to occupy further mental space. The ultimate protection against naysayers is internal conviction, a clear vision of your purpose and values that remains steady regardless of external opinion. As Aurelius wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment." This power of reframing criticism represents one of the most valuable forms of self-discipline we can develop. Find wise people to emulate.